Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, February 23rd, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we will head over to Sharon Florentine, where she meets with Paul Forit, Director of Product Management at Styra, to talk about the launch of the industry's broadest policy library and toolset for infrastructure to its Styra Declarative Authorization Service. Then we go to Amanda Razzani, where she will meet with Deb O'Ray, co-founder and CEO of DevZero, to talk about how the company raised $26 million in funding and the general availability of its developer environment platform. Then we will air a session from the DevOps Experience 2022. In this session, Derek Holt, General Manager of Intelligent DevOps at Digital.ai, talks about the steps organizations take to shift from reactive DevOps towards AI-powered DevOps and value stream management to accelerate innovation in business value creation. Then we go to Bonnie, where she sits down with Brahm Singh, Chairman of Verdana, to talk about the future of sustainability and carbon management in the data center industry. We will then be airing an episode of Techstrong Women. In this episode, Jody Ashley and Tracy Reagan talk with Liz Rice, Chief Open Source Officer at Isovalent, about the extended Berkeley packet filter and its impact on an open source ecosystem and observability, the challenges open source developers face with the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act legislation, and the significant impact AI has had on open source. We will then air a session from Predict 2023. In this session, Mike Vizard leads a panel of experts, including Austin Parker of Lightstep, Yasmin Rajabi of Stormforge, and Matt Butcher of Fermayon, to predict how cloud native will evolve in 2023. Then we have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Dom Lombardi, Vice President of Security and Trust at Kanji, as Dom explains why cyber attacks in 2023 will continue to exploit the weakest cybersecurity link of all. Then, Mike interviews Datadog CISO Emilio Escobar, as Emilio explains why, despite the challenges, there is still plenty of room for optimism when it comes to cybersecurity in 2023. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for February 23rd. First up, Microsoft's Xbox gaming division has announced new partnerships with NVIDIA and Nintendo as it seeks regulatory approval for its proposed $86.7 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. The deals were announced on Tuesday with the aim of appeasing European Union antitrust regulators who held a closed-door meeting with Microsoft and its competitors. The partnerships involve a 10-year agreement with the chipmaker NVIDIA to make Xbox games available on its cloud gaming service, and a formalized commitment to a similar deal with Nintendo. Microsoft's proposed acquisition is currently being investigated by regulators in the US and Europe, and a decision from the European Commission is expected by March 23rd. Next up, Coinbase, the cryptocurrency exchange, reported a net loss of approximately $600 million for the fourth quarter of 2022. The company cited a significant downturn in trading volume and retail traders pulling back, as well as increased regulatory scrutiny following the bankruptcy of FTX in November of last year. However, subscription and services revenue increased by about 33% thanks to hefty interest rate hikes. Despite the loss, analysts believe that the outlook is encouraging, supported by its expense control and improving revenue trend. Zooming out, though, the overall crypto market isn't doing too hot, with investors and exchanges battening down the hatches as the crypto winter continues. In other news, Meta has announced that it is testing a new subscription service that would allow users of its platforms to pay for a verified account. Meta has announced the launch of Meta Verified, which will allow users to verify their accounts using government identification for a blue badge on their profiles, which it says will provide extra protection against account impersonation and direct customer support. The service will initially launch in New Zealand and Australia, with plans to expand to other countries soon. This move comes after Twitter's announcement of Twitter Blue, which also provides a verification service. It seems that social media companies are looking for new revenue streams, with Meta reporting its third consecutive quarter of revenue declines despite an increase in users. So it seems like subscription services might be the way of the future. Next up, Amazon announced that the company will require its corporate employees to return to office at least 3 days a week, marking a change from the current policy of allowing leaders to determine how their teams worked. Amazon stated that it made the decision after observing what worked during the pandemic and concluded that employees tended to be more engaged in person and more collaborated easily, as well as saying that the move could help local economies. This being said, the details of the policy haven't been finalized, and there will be certain roles that will be exempt. This move follows a broader trend of other companies, including Starbucks, Disney, and Walmart, who have been calling employees back to the office after the COVID-19 pandemic forced them to work virtually. So it seems both companies in the tech industry and outside of it are moving back towards more emphasis on in-person work. On digital CXO, we have an article that looks at how the European Investment Bank is backing digital transformation. Ever since the pandemic, digital transformation has accelerated fast, but successful digital transformation starts with investment. That's why the European Investment Bank has backed a $150 million Middle East investment capital initiative. The article looks at the venture fund and has a Q&A with the EIB to learn more about the investment. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On Container Journal, we have an article that looks at 10 open source Kubernetes native observability tools that you can use. Kubernetes is transforming the way organizations manage their cloud infrastructure. This being said, though, as this technology is being used, proper observability needs to be maintained. This article looks at some of the Kubernetes native observability tools that are currently available. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at how Tab9 announced how it's extended its generative artificial intelligence platform to allow developers to write code faster. Tab9 has stated that this new feature will make it easier for developers to test code at any time as part of its bigger push for more generative AI. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. My name is Sharon Florentine. I am the managing editor here at Techstrong Group. I am thrilled to be here today with Paul Forett. He is Styra's Director of Product Management, I believe. I'm going to turn it over to him. Paul, you want to give a quick introduction to yourself and to Styra, and then we will jump into some of your news.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, I'm Paul Forett, Director of Product Management at Styra, and I focus on infrastructure use cases such as Kubernetes, Terraform, and CloudFormation, which is what I want to talk about today. And for those who may not be familiar with Styra, we've been helping users solve authorization problems for the cloud-native world for about 7 years now. And it's what led Styra to create Open Policy Agent, or OPA, a general purpose policy engine that uses a declarative policy language called Rego to specify policy as code. And since we've donated OPA to the CNCF, it's become the de facto industry standard in authorization and is one of only a handful of CNCF graduated projects. And we're really proud of that milestone. So our product, Styra DAS Declarative Authorization Service, It serves as a unified enterprise control plane for OPA. So it helps users manage policy as code across a wide range of infrastructure authorization use cases like Kubernetes, Terraform, and CloudFormation, application API authorization use cases. So things like Envoy, Istio, Kong, Kuma, et cetera, as well as application entitlements. And today, Styra DAS is used in a wide range of company sizes and industries, including finance, government, energy, healthcare, telecom, as well as a bunch of consumer industries as well. But we see very large adoption, especially in those highly regulated industries.
Awesome. That was a lot.
Yes.
So when we're talking about Styra DAS, this is one of the broadest policy libraries and tool sets for cloud native infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yeah, in January and February, we've announced a number of new features for infrastructure policy guardrails. And so some of those things include expanding our Kubernetes compliance packs and rules. So we can touch on that a little bit later. And then we've also expanded our Terraform policy library, adding 500 new policy rules for AWS, Azure, Google, and Kubernetes Terraform providers. And then on top of that, we also launched a new use case for CloudFormation. So it's currently in a beta state with our enterprise customers, but we'll be making more announcements about when that will be generally available soon.
So it seems like Styra's found kind of a gap between developers and infrastructure platform teams that this is going to fill. So how did you go about finding that gap, and how does this fill it?
Yeah, so we hear from our customers, partners, and even OPA community members that authoring policy for infrastructure use cases is difficult. And we've approached this in two ways. One is by improving the policy authoring functionality in Styra DAS itself. So making it easier to author, test, manage, and audit policies based on your infrastructure authorization decisions. So for Kubernetes, that's admission reviews, because it's running as an admission control. OPA is running as an admission controller in the cluster. For Terraform, it's at plan time or at code time, so closer to the developer. And then the second thing we've done is increase the size of our built-in policy library. A lot of companies have very standard requirements for infrastructure authorization. So things like S3 buckets must be encrypted. S3 buckets shouldn't be public. Your database should have logging enabled. All of these sorts of things that are basically standards around making sure you have a good baseline security model. And that's where we see customers start first with things like our compliance packs and our policy library rules. And then for their specific use cases, that's when they need to expand and author custom policy that is specific to them and only them. So we can't offer, built-in rules that work for every single possible use case, but make it as easy as possible to author policies for those use cases using Rego and OPA.
Okay, makes sense. So then how does this address the security concerns associated with container usage?
Right. So for Kubernetes, what we've done is we have a number of compliance packs that help customers get to a good baseline state for their policy guardrails. So things like a NIST compliance pack for application container security, CIS benchmarks for Kubernetes, then more deeper ones like compliance packs for PCI DSS. And then recently we released a new compliance pack that aligns with the new pod security standards in Kubernetes. So since the pod security policy functionality has been deprecated in Kubernetes, we see users trying to move to using either an admission controller like OPA, or for simpler use cases, they can use the pod security standards and pod admission pod security admission that's built into Kubernetes. But many people, they need more advanced control over the policies for their clusters. So that's where OPA comes in. And then we build on top of that with Styra DAS by helping you manage your OPAs deployed in your cluster, and also simplifying the process of those OPAs, reporting back and pulling down data from a bundle registry, which DAS hosts. And then they also report back the state of the cluster. So that allows us to not only enforce policy at admission, but we can also give users a view of what's already in the cluster that is not compliant with their policies.
How does this overall, this is a pretty broad question. We're going from super detailed back out a little bit to like the 60,000 foot view here, I think. But how does this impact DevOps and platform engineering as a whole?
It's a great question. In DevOps, there's the shift left mindset of having security closer to the developer. So last year, we released our repository scan, or code scanning capabilities for Kubernetes and Terraform. And so all of these announcements that we've had in the past month or so around Kubernetes and Terraform also apply to our code scanning capabilities. So it's about adding more policy enforcement points into the DevOps cycle. So not just at runtime in the cluster, but you can have PR checks to make sure that the Kubernetes templates that you want to deploy comply with your policy. So that way you don't wait for your whole CI/CD pipeline to build, do the deploy, and then you get the policy violation. That's a very long process sometimes. And depending on the size of your cluster and your pipeline, could take 30 plus minutes. You don't want a developer waiting that long to find out that, they missed the CPU requirements that the company wants for pods, containers, and deployments. Right. So that's been key is adding more policy enforcement points to meet developers where they are in the DevOps cycle.
Totally makes sense. And it seems like it, excuse me, it seems like that also addresses some of the process stumbling blocks that people encounter when they're trying to deploy Kubernetes more widely across a distributed system.
Right. And where we see customers kind of have that aha moment with Styra DAS is when you get to a larger scale. So you have more than one cluster, or you have clusters with hundreds or thousands of nodes. And then you want to manage your policy in a centralized way across all your clusters. You don't want to have to specify the same policies over and over and over for each cluster, for each environment, for each team. And that's where Styra DAS has this concept of systems and stacks to allow you to have teams like a security team that might provide baseline guardrails, and then those are enforced on all clusters. And then individual application teams, they can have policy guardrails that are specific to their use cases, but it ensures that the company is always meeting those baseline security guardrails without having to worry that one team has gone off and chosen their own policy set and they've forgotten some pretty key policies that the company requires.
Yeah, it keeps everybody in the same path without anybody really going rogue.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Great. Well, I think that does it for me here. Thank you, Paul, so very much. Is there any last thoughts you want to share with us about the company or this news or?
Yeah. So for anyone that wants to learn more, they can go to styra.com. That's STYRA.com. And for infrastructure authorization and infrastructure policy guardrails, you can find that under the use cases section in our website. So that's where you'll find Terraform and Kubernetes. Since CloudFormation is still in beta, you won't find it on the website just yet, but we'll have more on that soon. And then for anyone that's interested in learning more about OPA and Rego, there's the Styra Academy, which you can also access from the Styra website, which has a number of video courses to help you learn how to write Rego and how OPA works in various use cases. So that's available for free for anyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your time and your information here with us. Always a pleasure to have Styra on Techstrong TV. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Come back and see us again soon.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello, I'm Amanda Razzani here for Techstrong TV, and I'm excited to be here today with Debo Ray. He is the co-founder and CEO of DevZero. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your company?
Yeah, so my name is Debo. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of DevZero. At DevZero, we're essentially building production-like environments for engineers to write code and to test within. A lot of these lessons for me came from my past experience of being an infrastructure engineer for 6 years at Uber. So I'm essentially trying to generalize a lot of those learnings at DevZero now.
Wonderful. So I understand you have some funding news to share with us. Could you share that with us today?
Yeah, so we recently, we're announcing a $26 million Series Seed and a Series A fundraising. The goal for this, for raising this capital for us is to essentially grow the team a little bit, primarily focused on the product and engineering side, as well as the go-to-market side for us.
And what are your expectations now that you have this funding? You have some goals?
Yeah, so essentially, goal number one is to get DevZero into the hands of more engineers around the world, because we see this whole a bunch of issues around the local software development process that's essentially impacting a lot of enterprise engineers across the world. So goal number one for us is getting DevZero into the hands of as many people as possible.
And what do you have any future plans outside of, can you share your next couple of goals after that?
Yeah, so essentially, right now, our main target is to get it into the hands of engineers, number one, then making DevZero successful in the hands of a few of the larger companies. Because mainly what we see is as a company is hiring more engineers and the internal engineer infrastructure is becoming more complex, that's where DevZero really shines. So out those two things in the hands of more and more customers will be the goal after that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I understand also that you just recently made available a developer platform. Can you share more about this?
Yeah, so essentially what we see in the market, Amanda, is like microservices are the new thing in software development today because it helps engineering teams operate faster. But fundamentally, it also comes at the cost of certain local development challenges. So DevZero's development platform essentially aims to solve these local development issues by moving fundamentally software development to the cloud, regardless of whether a company is on using Kubernetes or certain serverless infrastructures, or even if they are coding in monoliths. DevZero's our platform will enable every engineer at the company to have their very own production-like environments.
I know that's so important as more companies do these digital transformation initiatives. Everything is going to the cloud, and it's important to have more efficiency.
Yep, exactly. And especially in the times that we are in today, we are fundamentally resource constrained, right? And as a result, it's imperative for us to make sure our engineering teams are only focusing on the revenue generating aspects of the business. So I think that's how we aim for DevZero to provide value to our customers.
And do you have any current companies you're working with, or?
So we have a couple of them listed on our website as well right now. So extend.com is a company. They essentially sell warranties for them. They had a bunch of challenges around their use of serverless technologies that we were able to solve with DevZero and other companies, Turing.com. So for them, again, it was around onboarding engineers and essentially getting them up and running as fast as possible, and then helping them maintain their dev environments on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I think, this is all I had to share, and I'm very excited for the next couple of years of DevZero as we get this in the hands of more and more people out there.
Definitely. Well, congratulations, Devo. Wish you the best. Can't wait to see where this goes. And stay tuned for more from Techstrong TV coming up.
Hi, I'm Derek Holt, General Manager of Intelligent DevOps here at Digital.ai, and I'm excited to have a chance to chat with you about a perspective that we at Digital.ai, I think many in the industry have, as we think about this inflection point of where we are at from an industry, and as we think back towards the agile transformations of the early 2000s through the DevOps revolutions of 2010 and beyond, and now more and more looking at the role that data is going to play and the role that value is going to play in the next turn of the crank when it comes to how we build, deliver, and optimize software investments within our organizations. And so I'm excited to have a chance to chat with you a little bit today and explore some thoughts and ideas regarding what we're seeing in the industry and ultimately maybe predict the future a little bit as we progress on. And so it's interesting, as we sit here today, it is over 20 years, which is a little hard to believe, since the signing of the Agile Manifesto, and subsequently, roughly 10 years later, since famed venture capitalist Mark Andreessen penned his famous Wall Street Journal op-ed, Why Software is Eating the World, the concept that every business, right, and every way we consume capabilities is, if not directly being driven by software, certainly being influenced by software. And so here at Digital.ai, we have the opportunity, we work with over 50% of the Fortune 500 with over 1,000 large-scale enterprises around helping them accelerate their digital transformation and helping them ultimately harmonize the business processes, software development and delivery to develop and ultimately deliver on the outcomes that they expect, that their shareholders expect, that their customers expect. And what I see more and more, whether that be banks or insurance companies or travel companies or retailers, is that there's a more and more realization that every company in many, many ways is becoming a software company. And again, not just in the ways that they interact with their customers, which is obviously the one that we mostly experience. And as I jump on a flight here later this week, I'm not going to print out tickets. I'm not going to very likely even talk to an agent. I'm going to pull up my mobile app. I'm going to ultimately check in. I'm going to get a digital ticket, and I'm going to kind of scan my way all the way to my destination in many ways. But it's also not just through the lens of how we interact with our customers. It's also, if you think about, it's how we work. And if anything, one of the interesting observations from the obviously extraordinarily challenging times over the last few years in terms of the pandemic was the ability to quickly go home and work remotely, right? And obviously there was a tremendous amount of challenges and loss and other things with the pandemic, but we have been able to continue to do business, if you will, in many ways. I, like many others, I'm sure, set up at least a bit more of a comfortable home office. And I was able to kind of quickly adjust my way of working, and software was a core part of why I was able to do that. So ultimately, Mark Andreessen's prediction, 10 years ago of software eating the world, I think is in many ways becoming more and more true every day, not just in high tech, but in every single industry as software permeates across the board. And yet, as we sit here today in 2022, there are challenges. In particular, here at Digital.ai, we think a lot about the enterprise. Our core focus are the enterprise. We love startups. We love small businesses. Many of us, like myself, have done a series of venture-backed startups. But when it comes to how we think about our portfolio and who our target end users are, it's the enterprise. It's scale. It's heterogeneous environments. It's not dozens of developers. It's tens of thousands of developers spread all around the world, and previously spread around the world in different development labs, now spread around the world in a hyper distributed way around many, working from home, or at least in a hybrid work environment. And so if you have 10,000 developers, you may actually have 10,000 labs, because everybody's home is their individual lab. But as we think about the last 20 years, while we've made tremendous amount of progress and we've written a tremendous amount of code, and we've matured from the way that we plan and the way that we iterate and the way that we deliver and the way that we test and secure, we also know that there continues to be challenges, right? And particularly, again, the areas that we focused on, these challenges that are typically related to scale. And so I think about these three, and these hold true. I get the opportunity to spend a lot of time with CIOs and CTOs, and I'll highlight these almost every time I have a meeting. And at least two of the three, I'm getting a head nod, if not all three. And so, even though we are here, as I highlighted before, 20 years after the signing of the Agile Manifesto, and we have made tremendous amount of progress around becoming less waterfall, more agile, particularly at the team level, there is still a tremendous amount of work to do to adopt agile practices at scale. That means teams of teams, but also tool chains of tool chains. So across end to end, kind of the broader from idea all the way to running code. There are still a lot of opportunities for growth, and we saw that. You can see a light quote here. We run an annual State of Agile survey. This was our 15th year. Just last year, we'll launch the 16th year coming in the next couple months. And we saw during the pandemic, I think many ways out of necessity, an even broader acceleration of teams self-identifying as using Agile practices. And you'll see some other data from that survey throughout today's presentation. We've also seen more and more organizations saying, hey, over the last 10, 12 years, really due to the fact that software became so much easier to swipe a credit card and consume, I feel like I've got a lot of different tools to do a lot of things. In fact, I had a CIO tell me the other day, yeah, Derek, I got 5 of everything, right? I've got 5 SCMs, I got 5 planning tools, et cetera. And you are now seeing the pendulum swing back into the ability to, or the want to be able to unify tools together. And I think one of the interesting dynamics there is we actually believe that does not mean rip and replace. What that means is for individual enterprise companies to kind of get themselves out of being the tool integrators. They don't want to be that. That's not a value add for them. But to work with companies that can help bring together some of their existing investments, and then obviously bring more value on top of that. And that's a big part of this is not a commercial for Digital.ai today, but that's a big part of what we spend our time thinking about along the way. And then lastly, one of the things that I'm most excited about, you're going to hear a lot about this to today's presentation, is for decades now, these tools, both on the development side and more on the production side, with the standardization around ITSM and support desk and user telemetry solutions, et cetera, have been throwing off a tremendous amount of data. And we as an industry, and I use this as a self-criticism, we as a kind of vendor industry historically have not done that much interesting with it, in my opinion. Yes, we can set off alerts. Yes, we can give you burn down charts, velocity, et cetera. But it's a lot at the team level. And it's a lot to me of data, you kind of domain specific data lakes and lightweight dashboarding. There is a huge opportunity. And this, again, is something that we're delivering on today, to use all of that data and apply modern data lakes and machine learning and AI to not only be able to get a more panoramic view of how we develop and deliver software, but predict the future based on the past and tie technical outputs to business outcomes more directly than we ever have before. And so these are the big trends. And again, depending on what customer we talk to, one may be more important than the other. But I will tell you, these three are very, very kind of top of mind for kind of key executives. And so that then warrants the question: okay, if that's the case, how do we accelerate beyond that over the next 10 years, right? If the 2000s were about agile and kicking that off, which obviously is a journey we continue on, if 2010 and beyond was about automation and doing things at scale and governance and compliance around the business process of software development and delivery, how do we accelerate into this next decade, and how do we address some of the challenges I highlighted before? So number one, how do we adopt agile practices at scale? Number two, and I think this is really, really important, just because the software side of the house goes faster doesn't mean the business goes faster. So how do we start to adopt agile practices everywhere, not just within software development teams? And what does that look like? How do we start to unify the DevOps platforms, as I talked about before, not in a rip and replace way, but in a evolutionary way that starts to tie kind of core existing assets together, but also enhances those workflows through open integrations? How do we bring this augmented analytics and AI and ML both to the process of how we build software, but as we'll talk about a little bit later, also about what software we build? Is it valuable? Did our customer get happier or more upset? Did we make more money or less money? How do we tie these software investments not just to builds and test coverage and how many tests passed and cycle time and all of that? How do we tie it back to actual dollars and cents? And then lastly, along that, how do we kind of drive on this kind of journey towards what some call value stream management? We certainly highlight that, but at the same time, this is just about that transition to tying back to business value. And I think in many ways, moving past something we used to say a lot in the past, which is a business and IT alignment, to now say business is software and software is business. These teams should be very, very tightly integrated, not just aligned, which I think is the next step of that journey. So I want to walk through each of these just to kind of give a few thoughts, and then we'll hit on a few other elements before we close up. And so here, as I highlighted earlier, this ability to adopt agile practices at scale has been challenging. And I think some of this is rooted in a lot of the team level tooling that is in place, but also just the more complexity when you have teams of teams and need to manage dependencies and planning and whatnot above that. And some great frameworks have emerged over the decades, like SAFe and others. And there's a lot of different best practices that teams can pull from, but the requirements are very, very key, right? We need to be able to do this across heterogeneous tool chains and environments. So it can't just be for the latest in mobile or container or Kubernetes development. What about our mainframe investments? What about our colo investments? What about our more traditional cloud investments? It needs to be agile across the board because, of course, in these composite applications that exist today, the dependencies span all of those realities. We need to be able to do it in a hyper distributed way, right? We in many ways, maybe not gone, but certainly augmented are the days of, hey, we're going to get 150 people together in a big room planning session. That's harder to come by these days. And so how do we use more and more collaborative tools, or collaboration tools, but make those collaboration tools more domain and operationally aware along the way? And as I highlighted earlier, this business and software as one, no longer, to me, it's insufficient to simply have business and quote unquote IT alignment. This is about acknowledging that software is core to our business, and business, the end goal of the business is core to our software investments and unifying these teams as one. And you're seeing this obviously in the tooling, but you're also seeing it in the way folks are organizing their teams. And I think that will continue to evolve as we continue to progress. The second one is Agile Everywhere. This is one that was really, really exciting for us as we did, as I mentioned earlier, our 15th State of Agile report. One of the things that bubbled up that I had not expected, but once we saw it, I wasn't surprised by it. Made a lot of sense. Was during the pandemic, this was taken right around the end of the first year of the pandemic. One of the things that was kind of forced upon many organizations was to be more agile within other parts of the business. Of course, software development and IT are leading the way there. But think about being more agile around operations and around marketing and around sales and around other parts of the business. And again, the pandemic sort of accelerated this because there were points in time, if we all think back, where we didn't know what was going to happen the next week or the next day or the next month, of course. And so with that, out of necessity, folks started to adopt agile practices, making the entire business, not just the software part of the business, but the entire business more nimble, more dynamic. And what's been exciting is folks have started to see the value in that, and they've not kind of gone back to the way things were before. And so I expect these numbers to continue to grow. And again, it's critical. We can be as agile as we should be on the software side, but if the business isn't agile, we're not going to see the ultimate benefits that we need and ultimately that we expect. And so I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things, again, if I'm old enough, I'll date myself here, but I'm old enough to remember when we were buying kind of one size fits all, one product that fit everything. And it was like a centralized buying decision. This was kind of maybe late 90s, early 2000s. The pendulum certainly has swung over the last 10 years around kind of the proliferation of more and more software solutions, some very niche-y capabilities often, but also more autonomy for teams. That has created a bit of a tool sprawl. It has also, interestingly enough, on the positive side, it has created better enterprise software. So you've seen sort of the consumerization of enterprise software. The tools are better, easier to use, more enjoyable to use, which I think is a great thing. But we're going to start seeing the pendulum come back, and Gartner highlighted it here by 2024, 60% of organizations are going to move more towards platforms than to disparate tools that they have to stitch together. But again, as I mentioned earlier, and others disagree with this, but our view in the enterprise in particular is that does not mean that people are going to get rid of all the tools they have today and start over. What they're going to need is a platform approach that is an open platform that is going to allow it to integrate. And that's why, as a side note, one of the things that we invest heavily into the tune of hundreds of third-party integrations is that those types of integrations out of the box, because we find that our enterprise customers expect that, and it's a prereq given the scale and the heterogeneous nature of the environment. But you are going to see more and more this vision of being able to tie things together from idea all the way to running code, and then more and more that feedback loop coming from our production side of the house. All of that tying together is going to be key. I think just large scale enterprises are going to not want to do those integrations themselves. They're going to want vendors that can help them with that. And again, this is something that we are certainly leaning into. The other area, and I talked about this earlier, it is one that I could not be more excited about, is ultimately the role that data is going to play. And again, I overgeneralize here, but I think it's actually pretty fair, is that, we have historically as an industry, say you buy a product, let's say I buy a new testing product. It comes with its own domain specific data warehouse. It comes with its own reporting, some of its own dashboarding, and that's sort of the extent of it. And so I can sub-optimize within that one domain. But if I want a 360-degree view of the end-to-end business process, it's really, really impossible in many organizations. And again, this is a big part of what digital.ai does. In some ways, that's the AI in digital.ai. But imagine a world where we can democratize the data, not just on the development side, but also on the production side. Bring that data all into a universal data lake, not just the data from the tools that maybe we provide or another vendor provides, but all vendors across a heterogeneous environment. And then we can use that data to not only give that 360-degree rear view mirror perspective so we can identify risk earlier and see opportunities for improvement. But what if we started to use the fact that this is very repetitive data? There is a lot of data here, and it just is tailor-made for machine learning and AI. And we could start to apply those those machine learning models to predict the future based on the past, to be able to, yes, of course, have DORA metrics. But what if we had change risk prediction where we can predict whether or not we're going to have a negative impact on production and thus the DORA metrics through machine learning? Or yes, we have flow metrics, but what if we could predict how would accelerate our flow based on data? Where should we be focusing our attention to drive continuous improvements? It's really interesting. We as software engineers and developers are the ones that are building all of the machine learning and AI models that exist in the world. And we have not, for the most part, started to use AI and machine learning on how we work. And so there's this really great moment in time here as we're starting to pull all of that together and democratize the access to data. Again, both on the production side and on the development side. It's a really, really exciting time. And like many other parts of the business, whether it's supply chain or it's finance or other sales, et cetera, I do believe the enterprises that are using data, that are turning their data into information and that information into insights that are driving business outcomes are going to be the ones that have a huge competitive advantage in the next decade. And then lastly, and I touched on this earlier, I think for many of us, the broader category of value stream management maybe has been a little bit confusing, but ultimately I think of it very simplistically, right? To me, value stream delivery is about how we build software, and value stream management is that software that we build valuable, and the valuable is obviously that word can be a complicated one, but it's a very important one to highlight, right? When we're doing anything. We're making changes to a system, whether that's an internal application or a customer-facing application. And we know when we make changes, the end results either get better or worse. Performance is either better or worse. Quality is either better or worse. Customer satisfaction is either better or worse, and so on. And so ultimately starting to be able to not only upstream have those discussions so that we are very much aligned, and as I highlighted earlier, kind of business software integration, we're very much aligned on what the outcome we want to drive. And then just as importantly, having the telemetry and the analytical views to know whether or not that has happened. I think about this often in my earliest days as a software developer. I would get a new user story or maybe a defect. I would pull up my work management system. I'd pull up the code. I'd do my work. I'd make sure the build ran, the test ran. Everything was checked in, and I'd close the ticket. And I, for all intents and purposes, pack up and go home, right? I had no real visibility into when the heck that was going to get to a customer. And I certainly didn't know when whether or not on the flip side, whether or not when the customer did get it, whether they were happy or less happy, whether in some cases, whether or not they even clicked on the button that I created or the new wizard that was added. And so we now live in a time when all of that telemetry data exists. And so it's super interesting. And again, I think it's important when I say democratize data, it is, yes, breaking down the data silos of the past, but it's also making sure the data is not just kind of pulled into dashboards just for kind of management or executive levels. It needs to permeate the entirety of the team, because in the end, when I was a developer, I didn't need that to go to my manager's manager and then to my manager and then to me. I needed access to that data to say, hey, Derek, remember that change you made a month ago? It's now in production. Oh, great. Now I know. And then ideally, being able to look a week or two later, or depending on the application, maybe an hour or two later, and to be able to determine whether or not that was good. And then of course, applying even broader approaches to things like, progressive deliveries and feature flagging and other things that would allow me to run multiple tests at once. But tests are great, but you have to be able to measure whether or not A is better than B or B was better than A, and so forth. And so super exciting, I think, from my perspective, that this topic is becoming more and more prevalent across organizations. And again, whether you call it outcome-based delivery or value stream management, or there's a whole bunch of different terms here. I think the driver is very much the same. And then the one that I think it's important to note, and I think this is always, at least my perspective has always been, look, these things are not binary, right? This is not like we're going to wake up one day and say, hey, tomorrow we're doing value stream management, or tomorrow we're doing augmented intelligence and AI. It is ultimately a journey, right? And so like all revolutions, this will happen very evolutionarily. When we zoom out and we have a conversation 5 years from now, much like I kind of generalize the early 2000s as agile transformations and the 2010s as the age of kind of automation and DevOps at scale. The reality is there were incremental adjustments and changes that were happening every day, every week, every month. And we see that to be the case. And so one of the things that we really want to encourage organizations is to say, you could look at all of this AI and Azure Engine, and you could be on the left-hand side of this slide, and that's okay, right? And because the really great thing about this journey is that there's value to be derived, real business value, real technical value to be derived at every step of this journey. And it's interesting for us. We build tools to help people obviously continue to mature their software development and delivery practices, across planning and testing and DevOps and security and so forth. But we're also a development organization, and so we are somewhere on this maturity journey as well. And so I think it's been actually a really rewarding thing. We obviously use our own tools to drive this, and so we kind of get to learn along with our customers around the opportunities and challenges at each one of these steps along the way. So before we close out, I did want to kind of hit on one more topic, and I alluded to this earlier, but I really started to think about the way as a industry, as the way we think about the way we deliver, ultimately the way we deliver software. And I think we have spent a ton of time over the last 20 years on the first one, which is how do we build software, right? How do we plan? How do we code? How do we test? How do we secure? How do we release and deploy? And that's really, really important, right? I know this is a bad analogy, but let's use a manufacturing analogy. If I can't build the car effectively with high quality, with repetitiveness, with reasonable cost, it doesn't matter how amazing the design is and how great the marketing is, right? You got to actually be able to build it. Or if I can't build the iPhone, effectively in an assembly line, it doesn't matter whether or not demand is really, really high. So there's a prereq. You have to be able to do that well, and data plays a key role in that. Second to that, though, just because I'm really good at building it doesn't mean people want to buy it or use it or engage with it. And so we've got to marry these two different but highly related, optimize how we build software, but then ultimately optimize the value that software delivers. And so we think about it in a few ways. And again, this kind of ties back to those kind of core 5 trends. So first of all, now obviously I'm biased, so I would say you should use digital.ai tools to do this. But regardless, we need to be able to have, if we want to get good at how we build software, we need to have really good end-to-end from planning all the way to deployment with testing and securing and all of that in between. We need end-to-end analytical views, not just within each of the circles on this slide, but overall the entire circle. And we need to apply AI solutions on top of that. And so we need to be able to, and this is actually how I look at the world, we as digital.ai, remember, we serve the enterprise. And so first thing we did when we unified our tool set is to go end-to-end integrations, and then to pull out the data from all of our tools. Yes, each tool has its own operational reporting, but we need to be able to have enterprise reporting. And so we put this data lake in the middle, and then some real BI, not just dashboards, but real BI and eventually ML and AI on the right-hand side. But then we said, hey, our customer is the enterprise. And the reality of the enterprise is they're never going to just have us. And this is frankly, a limited view of the logos that would exist. It's really probably, if not over 100, nearly 100 different kind of large players that exist across this tool chain. And so we said, hey, we need to not just do it for our own tools. We need to be able to do it for all of the tools. That gives people that 360-degree view. And again, not just the testing data, not just the planning data, but what happens when we bring those two data sets together and all the other ones? How can we find correlation and trends that are kind of between the practice areas, if you will? And by the way, not surprisingly, that's where a lot of the magic, both the outsized positive returns, but also the outsized negative impact of not doing certain things along the way. So we said, hey, we need to be able to pull that together and do that across a heterogeneous environment. And then we said it can't just be development tools. It's got to be production. So we need to be able to bring in user telemetry tools. We need to be able to bring in user sentiment tools. We need to be able to bring in customer success and support and ERP and cloud costs. All of those things need to be brought together and unified into single perspectives along the way. And so you get the idea here of the direction that we need to be able to go. So unify left to right, unify across the data, expand that data set to include all types of heterogeneous environments. And then we, and I think others, will apply machine learning and AI to that really tuned in data set to be able to drive these outsized impacts. And so ultimately, this allows us to create these environments where we can ultimately optimize not just how we build software. Here's an example. I won't go into all the details here, but that we can also optimize the business value of the software that we are ultimately building. And so this was a really good example. I, of course, sanitized all the data. But this was an e-commerce customer. They are saying, "Hey, we want to reduce abandoned carts." A very reasonable thing to do as an ultimately a business goal, but we want to do it without, on the left-hand side of the screen, we want to do it without causing problems. Like, we still have other priorities. It's not the only priority. So we don't want to reduce abandoned carts and have a lower NPS score, or we don't want to reduce abandoned carts and increase customer acquisition costs, which that one would be hard, but you get the idea. So they're able to look at the kind of sub-business goals and the kind of core one that's right in front of them. And again, we see folks starting with things as simple as OKRs to drive that alignment and the ability to measure the key results. Others are going further than that. But ultimately, we are doing this in production today. So as much as I'm kind of defining this as the next 10 years of software development and delivery, a lot of this is live today. And in many ways, your competition, in many ways, your own companies are likely already on this journey. So to summarize, and again, I appreciate everyone taking the time. Hopefully folks found these observations to be interesting. Hopefully you agree with most of them. I'd be shocked if you didn't agree with some of them, and that's okay. This is about having that type of a dialogue. But when I think about the things that are going to kind of really ultimately drive the next 10 years, I think it's really about that end-to-end, looking at the tooling as enabling that end-to-end business process of software delivery. I think you're going to see people move away from sub-optimizing and move towards optimizing. You're going to ultimately see the role that data plays to be extraordinarily critical in everything that we do at the practice area, amongst the practice areas, leveraging software development and delivery tooling, but also production tooling. And we're going to start to get to the point where we can really, really not just automate and optimize, but predict the future based on the past. And then lastly, I think it's a challenge for all of us. Doing these things in general is hard. Doing these things at mega scale and hyper distributed environments is really, really hard. And so there's a set, as always, it's about people, process, and tools to empower those individuals. There's a set of opportunities there to make sure that we're doing this. I firmly believe in this. The latest and greatest tools and the latest and greatest approaches cannot be reserved only to the new development efforts, because as much as they get 95% of the press, they ultimately in the enterprise typically result in 5 to 10% of the investment. And so we need to be able to, of course, empower the future, but we need to be able to backport and apply these best practices to the 10, 15, 20, 30, maybe 50, 60 years worth of software archaeology that has been built up, of which, yes, I maybe interact with the application through my mobile phone, but that mobile application very likely is hitting a mainframe, right? Is very, very likely hitting through layers of composite, of course, but you get the idea. And so we need to be able to do this across the enterprise, and to do it at the level of compliance and governance and security and all of those things that the enterprise expects. And so with that, I think I've reached my time. Again, I hope everybody got something out of the discussion. I think it's an extraordinarily exciting time to be in this industry. I've had the opportunity to kind of live through a bunch of these waves, both as a tooling vendor, but also on the other side, consuming tools and building out software development teams. And I think it's a really, really interesting kind of collision of a set of mega trends that I think is going to really create a lot of opportunities to accelerate, ultimately go faster and innovate faster and run tests faster, but to do so with confidence and with clarity and with proper governance and all of those things. So I think we can have both of those things, two things that sometimes are at odds with each other, right? If we wanted to go faster, that meant we had to be willing to have more risk. I think we're going to be able to kind of balance that risk and speed a little bit better through a lot of this automation, through a lot of this uses of data, connectivity, end-to-end visibility, on and on. And so, again, thanks so much for the time. Hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation, and look forward to chatting more soon. Thanks so much.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
I'm Bonnie Schneider for Techstrong TV. In the fight against carbon emissions, the role of digital measurement, reporting, and validation is crucial. And joining me now to talk about this important topic and discuss DMRV is Brahm Singh. Brahm, thank you so much for joining us. Brahm is the chairman of Verdana, a leading player in the sustainability and carbon movement. So thank you so much, Brahm. We really appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This is a great opportunity to share what's been happening on our side in sustainability. So please, I'm very thankful.
Great. Well, Brahm, can you share with us what motivated you to make the move from telecoms and data centers to the sustainability and carbon management sector with Verdana?
So, Bonnie, data centers, they consume 40 times the energy of a similar sized commercial facility. So they better be tied at the hip to sustainability. Now, struggling with energy issues for years, I met up with this young group of people who were setting up Verdana, and they showed me everything that was wrong with sustainability and with people like me. They and I agreed on one thing, though, that the way out was to digitize the pain points. And I saw what they were doing, and I then decided to move in with them. And, it's been great. I feel young again, doing something useful for a change with my life. So it's fun. Yeah.
That is good. It's very invigorating to have that experience. So how does the use of digital measurement, reporting, and validation, also known as DMRV, contribute to reducing carbon emissions?
So Bonnie, if the problem is people like me, it's best to get them out of the equation. And that's what DMRV does. So here's the thing, just think about it. Today, the carbon trade is a multi-billion-dollar business, right? With no commensurate reduction in greenhouse gases. And why is that, one would ask? And it's because the system is being gamed. And I can go into detail, I won't, but if you want, there are three major issues.
Go ahead, feel free.
Okay, so the three things. One is the validation on the ground, whether a project is worthy of carbon credits. This is extremely human intensive. The validator has to go there, he has to check it out, he has to interact with the project, then he's paid by the project, creating a conflict of interest there. And the system is being gamed. So that's one. Second one is, it's an invisible commodity, Bonnie. And invisible commodity means the amount of fraud multiplies. And you have instances where the same carbon credit is sold to multiple buyers. And then, of course, you have the matter of international double count. This guy sells the credit, this guy buys it, and both show a reduction in greenhouse gases. All of this can be minimized or eliminated by DMRV. And that is where this thing plays a part. People know this. The offset purchaser, if you ask them, there was a report I just read today, and it says that it's number one. when the guy who's buying the offset, his number one concern is it being measured properly? Is the verification done properly? Is it being reported properly? I'm paying money for this carbon credit to offset my footprint. Is it a valid carbon credit, or is it greenwashed? So this being the concerns, what Verdana does, Bonnie, is to create an immutable digital link between the remote carbon footprint and the people receiving the information, like government bodies, registries, exchanges. So that's what DMRB does, at least from the Verdana in the Verdana scheme of things.
I'd like to take a deeper dive into that. So how does Verdana use blockchain technology to enhance validation and certification of carbon offset credits?
Okay, so the blockchain part is simple, Bonnie. Blockchain is just it's a bookkeeping mechanism. It's digital ledgers. So it allows for accurate, immutable bookkeeping. Okay, see what it does. I told you about the invisible carbon credit and how it can be sold to multiple buyers. Well, with blockchain, that's not possible, because the blockchain will keep a record of the provenance of that carbon credit. Where did it come from? Has it been sold before? And if it is sold, the blockchain then burns that carbon credit, and it's no longer available. So there are very strong checks and controls that only a blockchain can offer. But that, like I said, that part is simple. The tough part, Bonnie, is to extend the blockchain's immutability to the distant carbon footprint. That's the trick. That's the secret sauce, right? I mean, the blockchain is immutable. It does its job perfectly. But how do you feed accurate, immutable data to it? And that's the trick. And that's what Verdana has done. It takes the immutability of a blockchain all the way to the distant footprint, and then it connects the blockchain to digital registries like Sir Carbono. So we don't connect with everyone. If you're not digital, I don't want to connect with you, right? But if you're digital, like Sir Carbono, please, let's get together. We get together on a blockchain bridge, and now you have the immutable digital link from the footprint to the registry. And this is something that the World Bank has been, fighting this battle in the sustainability world to digitize. If there's one body that I applaud, it's the World Bank, because they keep pushing for all of us to digitize. And I wish everyone listened to them.
How do you guarantee the accuracy in these areas?
Through transparency, Bonnie, through transparency, something the trade can learn. We provide registries with a digital dashboard from where they can see their project. So the one registry said to me, I want one dashboard on which I can see all my projects and see what's happening there in real time, and minimize my using human validators to go there. They can still be there, but at least I can see what's happening. So this is what one registry asked of us. Now, we do this for them, and then the calculations we do are based on their methodology, not ours. So look what happens. They get a dashboard, they see what's happening on the ground, and the math that's being used is their math. They say, this is the methodology we want you to follow, and that's what the machine does. And so that transparency is how we guarantee the accuracy. That the question you asked was, how do we guarantee the accuracy? Well, that's how we do it.
Well, that's definitely interesting in one aspect. I was wondering about the privacy. So many people are concerned about their data being breached. How does Verdana safeguard the privacy of the information that's gathered during the carbon offset credit validation process?
Through authentication, various levels of authentication, these kids are put together. It's almost irritating to I have to go through hoops to get the information. So, for example, if you're a registry, then you have an authentication process that only you and your people can access your information. No one else can. These are tried and tested standard measures in the IT world. which are put in place, firewalls, etc., to ensure that I can't see the information that belongs to you. It's impossible.
We have a lot of people that are watching that work in the DevOps, DevSecOps, and cyber communities. I was wondering if you could tell me how Verdana's DMRV platform is compatible with other tools and systems that might be employed by these workers.
Sure, Bonnie. It's simple. We are open source. There's nothing proprietary. Everything we do is open source. And then we use REST APIs, they call them, and blockchain bridges to connect to other people in the ecosystem. So not only is our platform based on open source, it also connects to people very easily. There's nothing proprietary. There are no walls, except of course the walls against unauthorized access, which I spoke to you about. But other than that, it's a completely open system. We invite and welcome everyone to come and join us. We then also want to be part of the greater ecosystem. For example, I mentioned the World Bank. They have created something called the CAD Trust, which is a kind of a meta layer, call it an umbrella registry that everyone can connect to and see all the information available out there from different registries to actually address the issue of double counting that I mentioned, one of the big issues, right? I mean, both sides are counting lowering of emissions, which is inaccurate. If I'm lowering my emission then because of credits I bought from you, then you need to up yours, up your information, your emission in your accounts. That doesn't happen. And so all of this is done through the transparency that we have learned actually from the World Bank, and we follow those methods.
Well, looking at the big picture, how has the interest in carbon offset credits evolved in recent years?
Well, it's huge. If you look at the history of carbon credits, right? Carbon became a commodity in 1997 under the Kyoto Protocol. And almost instantly, it was a success. And the trading began. The carbon prices went through the roof, and carbon trading was just exploded until people found how the system's being gamed. And then the Paris Accord came with the intention to sort things out, and they're trying to, and the only way they can sort it out is through digitization. But it is slow. Getting all the countries to come together and make decisions is a slow, excruciating process. And I'm sorry to say the can keeps getting kicked down the road. Mm-hmm. So what has taken up the slack, Bonnie, is the voluntary market. So because the various companies, for all good reasons, want to do something about their carbon footprint. And so they want to buy offsets. And that's why a voluntary market has come up to supply them the offsets that they need. Now, how has it evolved? I think one of the major changes that is happening again, people like World Bank are sponsoring it, is telling these companies, don't just buy offsets to reduce, rather than do something real to reduce your carbon footprint. So for example, now United and other airlines, I believe, are rather than buying offsets, are using sustainable fuel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, mm-hmm. No, I was just going to say, we just have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask one final question. What are the advancements and developments that you anticipate for the sustainability and carbon management industry in the future?
Bonnie, the digitization and countries opening their own national digital registries. This is the next thing that's going to happen, because the kind of confusion that's taking place today, kicking the can down the road, can't continue. So I foresee countries having national registries, strong bodies, digital registries, and that's I think if we talk again in a year's time, I hope to see, both of us can see that happen. That countries are creating strong national digital carbon registries. If that happens, that's progress.
Well, Brahm Singh, thank you so much for joining us from Verdana. We really appreciate the interesting facts that you provided in this industry and how it's growing and the developments that are ahead for the future. Thanks for joining us, Brahm.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for making time.
My pleasure. Well, stay with us. We have a lot more coming up on Techstrong TV. I'm Bonnie Schneider.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Techstrong Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Techstrong, and I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Reagan, creator and CEO of Deploy Hub. And, in her free time, she's busy working with the Linux Foundation, where she sits on the boards of the OpenSSF and the CDF Technical Oversight Committee. Sounds like fun. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a quick update about what's happening here at Techstrong. Be sure to register for TechstrongCon 2023 virtual event on March 16th. Speaker submissions are still open, and we always love sponsors. Techstrong will also be hosting our annual DevOps Connect DevSecOps Day at RSAC in San Francisco on April 24th. And be sure to look for us on Broadcast Alley all week, where we'll be live streaming. Stop by and say hi. You can register for all of our events by going to techstrongevents.com, and be sure to tune in every day to Techstrong TV for great shows and interviews. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Well, Jody, first of all, it's great to be here. And I'm really excited for today's guest. Liz Rice is amazing, and she's in the security space. And it's timely because, we talked about a few months back, probably early in the show, we talked about the Biden administration's requirement for submitting software bill of materials, or SBOMs, with your software if you're doing business with the US government, which, by the way, is a very reasonable request, to be honest. Even though many companies may struggle with it, it is a reasonable request. We've always been waiting for the other shoe to drop. And in this past week, we heard it did. So now we have the European Cyber Resiliency Act. I've read through it. It's not as straightforward as an executive order that says, hey, SBOMs are needed. It's far more detailed. And I have some concerns about the open source community and how the open source community is going to comply with some of the requirements. And it does have a list of the kinds of software that they're going to be worried about. So it may not apply to all open source tools or open source packages. But anyway, it's out there, and people should be aware of what Europe is doing now to help safeguard European software and what gets installed in European environments around security. So they're starting to get heated up. This discussion around security and software security and supply chain security when it comes to software is getting pretty real. And I'm hoping that we can get some insights from Liz on this.
Awesome. All right. Well, Tracy already let the cat out of the bag. Our guest today is Liz Rice. Liz, I'm going to let you tell us what you're doing, what you're up to, and just give us an introduction about you.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Liz Rice. My job title is Chief Open Source Officer with Isovalent. And Isovalent is the company that originally created the Cilium project, which is now part of the CNCF. And it's based on eBPF, which is a technology that I'm super excited about. So, as Tracy mentioned, I've been involved in sort of security side of things for quite a while. We can use eBPF for some really interesting security related things. As we're recording, I'm kind of preparing for the Cloud Native Security Conference, which is next week, probably a week or two ago by the time you actually see the recording. But so things like supply chain I am absolutely confident is going to be a huge topic of conversation there, and I think eBPF will be as well.
So what's your thoughts on the Cybersecurity Resilience Act?
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
how is it
So,
going to impact open source? Should we be worried?
yeah. So actually, another role that I have, another hat that I wear, I'm on the board of an organization called Open UK, which is all about using open technology, open source, open hardware, open data more in society. And a big part of that is related to policy. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a technologist, but I get to hear, some of the opinions of people who are much more kind of knowledgeable in that area than I am. And I know Amanda Brock, who's the CEO of Open UK, was talking about how, at least in an early draft of that act, there appeared to be some confusion about if you release open source software, you're releasing it into the wild and letting people use it, but you're not going to take liability for it. Nobody's going to take liability unless there's some kind of commercial arrangement. And I think that, at least in the earlier draft, from what I understood, it was kind of confusing that, the liability that no open source project is going to be able to take responsibility for, or liability for something that's an open source piece of code. So yeah, I think that might still need to be ironed out. I'm not sure.
But it kind of drives down deeper into even commercial packages who are using open source packages, because now the commercial packages, they're going to basically be saying they're going to take liability for the open source packages that they're consuming.
Yeah, and I think
isn't that right? How it's written?
I don't think that's awful, in the sense that whoever is the commercial company who's going to take that liability on, and they're going to have to decide what risk that involves and whether they're being paid enough to take that risk. They get to choose whether they're using open source components or not. I think it will help to encourage good practice, because although no open source project in its right mind will take liability, that doesn't mean that they can't do good practices and that they can't have things like software bill of materials. So things like the CNCF is really encouraging projects to incorporate more of these, like dependency management practices and SBOMs and all this good stuff that is coming up now, the tooling that we're starting to have around tracking your dependencies. Open source projects can do that, and I think that's a very good thing. And then commercial projects that depend on them can make decisions about, okay, does it have, an OpenSSF scorecard? This is the scorecard project.
The scorecard, the OpenSSF scorecard.
Yeah. So I think things like that will help commercial projects understand the kind of risk they might be taking,
I kind of feel like, we at the OpenSSF, we really have to get our ducks in a row, or our geese in a row, I guess you'd say. But it's going to take us a while to build out these practices. And I just hope that open source will still be consumed, because I think it's open source has taken us a very long way. And look, Kubernetes is open source, for goodness sakes. So how do we, it's going to be interesting over the next, I'd say, 3 years, and how we're navigating it and the impact that open source will have with these new acts. And, we still have other regions. China is certainly to follow, what they're going to say. So it just makes it scarier and scarier to use external unknown code. And that describes open source, especially packages, maybe not tools, like we have an Artilius project that manages and consumes SBOMs. We have Kubernetes. Those may not be as, and Jenkins, other tools, Backstage. There's all kinds of great kind of DevOps tooling that you use to build out your software. But what you're delivering and the packages that's being included in it, I feel like we're going to see an impact in the future in terms of commercial code that is being, we're talking about COTS basically, that we're selling to other companies, an entire package, especially if you're selling into the European market, that there's going to be a concern about putting open source in there. So maybe there's going to be a lot more work for coding, or tools like Copilot, where you take snippets, right? Yeah, I think it's going to
I mean,
change. Is it going to be a disruption? There just is.
the worst outcome, and I barely even want to say this idea out loud, but the worst outcome would be like, not necessarily just Copilot. I don't want to point the finger at any given implementation, but AI generated software that creates a commercial variant of something that's essentially copied from the open source project. And that would be awful, I think. You know,
how will AI in general affect open source? I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'm just all this stuff that's going on right now. It's AI does this, AI does that. It scares me.
The really frightening thing is how, like, at a superficial level, it can be really quite accurate. You know, you can read these amazing articles and you think, oh, wow, that's 90% right, but it's the 10% that's wrong that's dangerous. And that's, I mean, that's got to be true in code as well, right? Automatic.
Well, we're going to see more code automation tools. I don't know what you want to call it. More code, like more solutions like Copilot. You know, we just started hearing about, what is it, Chat
GPT.
GPT.
Yeah. That's all I'm getting. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to talk about a chat? That's all we're getting bombarded with on my end right now. And it's like, wow, scary.
Not my answer would be not necessarily. I think it's a very interesting application for AI. Will we be able to see through it soon enough? Yeah, we'll learn. Humans are good at pattern matching too. Professors will be able to go, oh yeah, that's definitely not written by this student. I know better.
Right.
So I think that we'll see through that. I certainly wish.
But won't it just evolve? Every time we think we're seeing through it, it's like there was a big thing this week about a university, was it Wharton, and somebody used it to write a paper, and the paper was great, but they said that the English used in it was so perfect, you could tell that it was fake. The information was great, but the grammar was so spot on. They're like, no human wrote this.
No human wrote it, right? Especially
so now they're going to
humans.
throw in dumb words, and they'll it's been a big topic of conversation in my household in general. So.
Well, I think in the coding world, we're going to see something similar. But what I believe, what I foresee happening are tools like, again, I'll just keep bringing up Copilot, where instead of having open source packages that we're consuming, they're going to have those modules that they've now have absorbed and they are pushing forward. And they're going to have the ownership of that now. So Copilot will have the licensing for that under some, I don't know how it licensed the code, but it's generating code just like Chat, whatever it is, GPT or whatever it is doing. And I think that may solve some of the open source package issues, but at the same time, that it will crush the open source market in terms of consumable packages. Like,
hey, Trace, let's stop for a sec because your mic went out.
It did.
Yeah, we can kind of hear you, but you sound like you're in the other room.
I think you moved and it might have fallen.
I admit, I got excited and I knocked it. So anyway,
just go back and start your thought over and we'll get it edited. No big deal.
Okay, so when we talk about things like code generation, what I believe will happen is that these packages that are commonly used that people consume as an open source will be included in the code generation. So they no longer will be coming from an open source library that you pull from some location, some repository. And that is how we're going to address things like the Cyber Resiliency Act, because then the company that's sending out the software will be the producers of it, even though they used something that's generating code.
I think there's going to be some really interesting intellectual property discussions and cases where, if AI didn't make everything up completely from scratch, it's learned by looking at other code. And, I've seen some, if I use eBPF as an example, I've seen some little paragraphs of text about eBPF that people have generated, at work, kind of for fun, like, let's see what it says about. And you can recognize some of the phrases. You can see that this is exactly what we say. We've said this phrase over and over and over again, and the AI has picked it up. And, maybe that's not quite our intellectual property, but there's going to be some point where, Copilot or an alternative, is it infringing other people's copyright by, regurgitating lines of code, algorithms, whatever level we want to think about? That sometimes if you look at other people's, a bit like you said, you can spot when somebody's copied an essay or if it wasn't their work. Are we going to start seeing AI generated code that's really just infringing other people's copyright?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
No,
the lawyers must be thrilled. Income stream for years.
Yeah,
We'll see. We will see. And
the bigger question is, let's take a poll to see when the first lawsuit happens.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is going to disrupt the software developer, though. We are starting to see a shift in everybody's not writing every single line of code, and that's why open source has been so popular. And as these kinds of tools become more and more accepted, I think that the role of the software developer will change. We'll get good at putting together the pieces like a Lego set. And at the same time, that might be good for women who are at home, working from home.
Well, yeah, the history of computing had women working from home back in the early days. So
yeah, and not a lot of women go and take software classes. They don't take programming classes. I think it's less than 10% in most universities of women in taking software classes and learning to code. However, they may very well be able to pick up fairly quickly from a junior level, 2-year program coding, and be able to use these tools. And maybe the industry will shift and more women will become part of it because they want a job that they can do from home and raise their kids. It's kind of like when I was a kid, my neighbor, her mother worked from home, and I thought it was the coolest thing. But she she typed like 130 words a minute. And she sat with the headphones on and she typed up all at one doctor's notes for the entire day. And somebody would deliver his notes and his recordings, and she would sit and type. And I thought it was awesome because mom was there all the time, right? And she could get up, do laundry, cook for us, do whatever she needed to do to be a mom, and she still had a job. And I always thought that was just amazing. So maybe that will happen for women.
So
I have a little story.
Did that when my kids were little.
Yeah,
I absolutely did that. But technology evolved the job I was doing away. It started out by driving to a truck and picking up documents to enter every day. And I stayed home with my 2 kids. Then the documents became a CD. We'd pick up a CD. And then it became an online enter situation where we'd pull it up and we'd enter from the document. And then it went away because the system could scan and recognize it all, and they didn't need us at all. That happened over about a 5-year period. But I did that from home so I could stay home with my kids till they were school aged.
Exactly. And I think a lot of women want to do that.
When I was a kid, when I was kind of learning to type, I did learn to type on a typewriter, and my mum was a psychiatrist, and she actually had me typing up her notes, just as a kind of, and which I really enjoyed because I was like typing and but it was, I don't know how many times I must have, and she specialized in old people as well, so I must have typed the word dementia thousands of times. And it turned out I was spelling it wrong. I spelt it T-U-R-E at the end of like thousands of people's notes. I don't know. I'd heard the word. I just assumed that was how it was spelled.
That's amazing.
So then, how did
spell
you
check
go?
on the typewriter?
No.
Yes. So how did you go from a teen spelling dementia wrong to software? Did you take computer science in college?
I actually took engineering in college, but I was already really into computers before I did that. we had a ZX80, like this tiny little 1K RAM machine that just did basic. And when we first got it, I was a bit disappointed because what I really wanted was like a video game. And this computer arrived and I thought, well, I'll make the most of it. And then I taught myself programming and that was it. And I always knew I was going to work with computers. So I didn't want to do computer science as a degree just because the engineering course looked more interesting and a bit broader. I was quite interested in things like electronics as well. And I wanted to be quite practical. But so there was an element of programming and logic and things in my degree, but it wasn't a computer science degree.
Yeah, I wanted to build cars.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And my mother said, what are you going to move to Detroit? And then and I'm from California. I was like, maybe that's not the best career for me. I was like, don't they build cars in California? And she's like, all the big companies are in Detroit. So I changed to business math, and most of that was computer stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
But engineering was what I was interested in.
So Detroit was where the last KubeCon was. Yeah. And I thought it was actually a really great place. I it was really welcoming. I was only there for a few days, and it was definitely, it had a variety of different neighborhoods, let's say.
It does.
But given how negative a lot of people had been beforehand, right. I was like, actually, no, this is nice. A lot of people have been incredibly welcoming. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. It's probably going through a revival. CSC used to be in Detroit. They were one of those big, tall buildings. So they had a technology sector that they were slowly kind of trying to bring around before the I guess it was probably late 1990s, early 2000s, where they really started going through a pretty heavy recession. So after
clearly had dark times, but it was I thought as a visitor it was a good place to visit.
Yeah, our team really enjoyed it as well. Techstrong had a group there doing video, and they really had a good time as well.
Good.
So Liz, tell us about KubeCon. Was there anything really cool that you learned, or anything that you want to share?
Oh, trying to remember what was big back then. That was in November.
Yeah, so long ago.
Last year.
It was like another year.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really fun for me was so Cillian Project has been growing. We hit the button on a PR to apply for graduation, so that'll be a massive step. And we had our first ever kind of in-person community meeting, because pandemic, we haven't been able to do it really before. And we honestly didn't know how many people would show up to this project meeting, because it was one of the pre-event days, so we didn't know how many people would be in town, and there's loads of these co-located events, and we put up a sign-up sheet, and there wasn't a huge amount of activity on the sign-up sheets. We thought, well, worst case, there's quite a few maintainers here, and we'll get on with some work or something. We'll be fine. And then people just kept arriving and showing up, and we had like a packed room. We had to keep going and getting more chairs, which was brilliant, seeing people wanting to get involved. And some of them came with like, I've got this particular issue I really want to, get into the nitty gritty of, or other people who are just like, I heard Cillian's interesting. Can you tell me what it is? So it was really great.
Why don't you do that for us? Because I'm not sure that we've really clarified the project that you're working on.
Yeah, sure.
And it's incubating at the CNCF.
It is, yeah.
Yes.
It's based on this technology called eBPF, which we can come to in a minute. And it is really observability, networking, and security for cloud native. Not necessarily even just Kubernetes, although the vast majority of people are using it in Kubernetes environments. But we do have some people using it for things like standalone load balancers, replacing some like physical boxes for load balancers. And yeah, the amazing power of it is really based on eBPF, which is this technology that allows you to run programs within the kernel. So you can hook into different events, which could be things like a network packet arriving, or different points in the network stack, and you can change the behavior of the kernel when these events occur. So you can do things like get a network packet and modify it and send it somewhere else. So we can use it in Cilium to do things like bypass some parts of the network stack that aren't necessary for cloud native networking, so it makes performance better. We can do things like network policy, so very efficiently in the kernel, checking whether or not a given network packet or connection is in or out of policy. And if it's not in policy, we just throw it away. It doesn't happen. So it's super powerful and really interesting because you get into the kind of nitty gritty of the kernel and you know, how is this networking stack really working and things like that. So yeah, I'm finding it really fascinating.
Well, when you talk about code that's that deep in the stack, open source code that deep in the stack, I have to go back to, I wonder how the Cyber Resiliency Act is going to impact that level of code. I hope that when you figure that out, the attorney that you guys might work with, or somebody could write a blog on it, because that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. You know, how is that going to be impacted? Because I'm sure that that's going to be in the list. I think one of the items on the list.
Everybody is running. So many people are, so many organizations are running on Linux. You know, Linux is open source. Now, maybe they're buying it all through, you know, distributions like Red Hat so that somebody is taking some liability. But yeah, it's you know, it's a big and complicated piece of code.
Exactly. And, you know, with kind of this global recession we're seeing, generally when we see a recession, the use of open source code spikes. When we are flush with cash, people are going out and buying commercial things. But as soon as they are cutting their budgets, they start relying on open source. So we have three kind of this intersection of three things that are impacting our industry right now. One is this potential of open source being consumed more because of the recession. Two, people are moving to Kubernetes and a microservices environment. And three, we have a problem with our open source security, all happening at the same time. It is a very impactful time, and it's a very interesting time to be in software, especially on open source projects.
I do think this, you know, the perception of security, you know, what's happened is a lot of these problems have come to light. It's not like there are new security, well, there are new security problems, but an awful lot of them have been around for a long time. They've just been discovered, just been realized. You know,
we have it's a security awakening.
Yes,
it really is.
Yes, it is. Exactly. So I wouldn't want people to sort of think, oh, you know, because people are using open source, things have become less secure. I think actually the opposite is true, because there is more kind of light being shone on those projects and there are more people's eyes on that code. It's just that we've got a lot more awareness now of when security, I mean, a decade ago, people lost your data. They didn't really even have to tell you about it. Whereas now it's, you know, it's a big deal. They really have to tell you when they've lost your data.
And, you know, and I think things like the CRA and the Biden administration's SBOM requirements, they're guidelines. They are, you know, they're guardrails. And we should have been looking at doing these things quite some time ago, but there wasn't, before the security awakening, before Log4j, let's just make it clear, nobody really cared to talk about it. Security was sort of like testing, you know, it's like, yeah, we'll get to it. You know, it's true. I think testers have always been forgotten heroes, and security people are the same way. But now we've gotten some light to the problem, and, you know, when you shine light on a problem, we generally get it solved. It's just going to take us a while.
So,
and you know, you said
before
something
we get, oh, go ahead, Trace.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, before we get too far along, because we're going to be winding up shortly, I want to hear some more about your new book.
Yeah, so I mentioned about eBPF and how I am fascinated by it, and I have been writing a book about it. It's called Learning eBPF. It is really a dive into kind of how you can get started with eBPF programming. It's really, I am a huge believer in seeing something concrete, writing some code, making something happen in order to understand what it's based on. I'm not someone who learns very well from looking at, boxes and lines. I want to see code and I want to see what happens. So using kind of starting from a hello world, going through lots of different examples, I'm hoping to convey some of the power of what eBPF is. And if people do want to write their own program, I think not that many people will really need to write their own eBPF code, but if they want to explore it, they might find they really want to get involved, and great. And even if they just go, I'm just doing this so I can understand it, even better.
What's the name and when will it be released?
Yeah, so the title is Learning eBPF. It's coming out through O'Reilly. They're the publisher. There is already early kind of unedited release of a few chapters that you can download from isovalent.com. And then the full book has just gone into production. So literally, I've been looking at copy editors sort of changing the font on different terms and so on.
You're down to the really fun part.
Yeah, we're getting really close now. And the hope is that it will be out. It was originally scheduled to be in June, but we're well ahead of schedule. I think it'll be out probably in March, maybe April. And I'm really hoping we're going to get physical copies that we can give away at KubeCon in Amsterdam. That's my kind of dream.
And when is KubeCon and when is that?
It's the middle of April, I think.
KubeCon in Amsterdam?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. KubeCon in Amsterdam is it's the week before RSA, and that's why I know. So it's the week of the 10th, I believe. The 17th or the 21st, because our team's going over there and then they're flying straight from Amsterdam to San Francisco for RSA. So yeah, it's going to be a busy time. I'm only going to RSA, so yay. But yeah, that's going to be fun. I'm guessing you'll be there, Liz. So you got to look for Alan and Mike Vizard, and our team are going to be over there in Amsterdam doing live streaming, I believe. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, good. I think it'll be a really fun event. Amsterdam's a great city, and yeah, it's always good to see the community. I am a little bit conscious that travel budgets have been cut, so maybe it won't be quite as busy as previous years, but I still think it's the event in cloud native, really. So yeah, hoping to catch up with lots of people there.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I don't think I'll be there, but I wish everybody a good time.
Will you make it to the Chicago one then later in the year?
I don't know. KubeCon's really big. And for what we do, it's probably, we're just like a blip, so it's a little too big for what we're doing. And, we're part of the CD Foundation, the open source project. So I'm going to be at Women in Silicon Valley that week, but my partner will be at the CDCon, and a few of our committers will be at CDCon. So that's what we really focus on is CDCon. Generally, we would have gone to the function next week. I think it is next week.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but we're conscious of travel. We're a small startup. We can't go to everything.
Yeah.
Well, and like Liz said, with the economy, it's not going to be COVID that keeps people from traveling. It's going to be budgets.
And
so
it'll
be
pain
interesting.
in the butt of traveling. Traveling has not been fun, and at least in the U.S. in the last 6 months, it's been really it's been challenging. It'd be easier to drive.
Oh gosh. Well, I hope I'm not going to have to drive all the way from London to Seattle. That would be
we'll be back on boats, right?
That would be a long journey.
I am thinking of seriously considering cycling from London to Amsterdam though for KubeCon. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit of logistics to sort out.
How far is that?
Depends where you catch the ferry, because you do have to catch a ferry to get across the sea.
Really?
Yeah. But I am looking at a route that is probably only a total of about 150 miles on land, and then 150, 160, and then an overnight ferry. There's a considerably longer route with a considerably shorter or considerably longer riding, but considerably shorter ferry crossing.
So you'd have to decide whether you want to do the long ride or the short ride.
Yeah, it's more of a case of how long I'm going to take over it. And there's questions of things like how I'm going to get my luggage. Although one of my colleagues has volunteered to take a bag, so hopefully that'll be.
That'd be really fun, though.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. And I've got a couple of conferences over the next couple of weeks, but when I'm through that, I know there's a group of people who are also interested in the idea of putting a ride together. So if anybody's watching this and wants to join a ride from London to Amsterdam,
there you go.
King Liz on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
LinkedIn's
King
good.
Liz.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a group of riders heading to Amsterdam. Well,
I've said
Liz,
it out loud now, so it's got to happen.
Oh yeah, now she has to do it.
Right.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for being with us today. It was really fun getting to meet you and chat with you, and I'm sure we'll bring you back to Techstrong for some other fun stuff that we do here. And sounds like you and Tracy will get to see each other in person maybe sometime soon at another event. But we really appreciate you being here with us today. And
absolute pleasure. Yeah,
thanks
thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yes, Liz, it was fabulous catching up with you.
Yeah, great to see you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and stay tuned for more fun stuff on Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome to Scaling Cloud Native Vertically and Horizontally. I'm your host, Mike Bizard. Today we are joined by Austin Parker, who is Head of Developer Relations for Lightstep. And then below him on your screen, we have Yasmin Rajabi, who's Head of Product for Stormforge. And finally, we have Matt Butcher, who is CEO for Ferrymon. We're going to be talking about the current state of all things cloud native, where we are on this journey and how long it took us to get here, but more importantly, where we are headed next. Yasmin, let's start with you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a question and then explain a little bit about your own company and what you guys do as well to put some context around that. But the question of the day is, we've been at this thing for a while now. It seems like, maybe the better part of half a decade. And I guess the first question is, are we there yet? And what's coming next?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I work at Stormforge, and we are a Kubernetes optimization platform. So essentially, we provide right sizing for Kubernetes applications, and we do that by looking at data, running machine learning on it, coming up with configurations, and then automatically deploying those configurations in a user's environment so that we can intelligently help them scale both horizontally and vertically. So from the people that I talk to, I would say we're right in the thick of it. We've seen obviously a lot of growth in the adoption of technologies like Kubernetes, container-based technologies, the move to microservices. Now we're starting to see the rise of serverless and WebAssembly. So I think that growth is going to continue. It's not like we're going to slow down, but especially in this next year, I think teams are going to kind of take a finer grain look at how they've been doing things. We're right in that middle where it's no longer about, okay, I'm thinking about adopting container technology, or I'm looking at Kubernetes. It's, I'm here, I've scaled it, and now I'm dealing with those challenges that come at scale. So re-looking at processes, looking at how we did things and trying to do them better. So the first goal was, how do we adopt cloud native technology as soon as possible? How do we deploy? How do we transform our business faster? But I think now that we've reached this critical mass, I'd say more of what I'm hearing now is, okay, I want to relook at how I make my systems more performant, how I make them more cost effective, how do I make them more reliable. So we're kind of dealing with some of those issues that never really gone away, but are at the forefront with a new form factor.
All right, great. Austin, do you want to put some perspective on that while telling us a little bit about what you guys do?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Mike. And I wanted to, to start, I want to actually echo what Yasmin said real quick, right? We're at Lightstep, you're part of the ServiceNow family, and we have had this really amazing opportunity over the past couple of years to go and talk to some of the biggest banks, right? The biggest telecom companies in the world. And what we've been hearing from them is that even in places where you would not expect cloud native to be, that's where it is the most, it's really taken root and it's thriving. I was talking to someone that's, VP of technology for a large financial institution. And what he was telling me is they had spent the last 5 years figuring out what they're going to do for the next 30 almost. And what did they pick? They picked Kubernetes, right? People had tons of options and they chose to develop in a cloud native way. And what they're seeing now, those challenges that Yasmin talked about in terms of scaling, in terms of right sizing, in terms of understanding those systems, those very large, complex cloud native systems, is that they need observability as kind of the next step, right? I like to explain observability as saying, this is all that stuff that you need to really kind of scale up cloud native and to really harness its potential. You need a way to kind of reason about and model these really complex systems and understand their performance and understand how much are they costing you. Are customers actually happy with what you're doing? All these changes you're making, are they actually, kind of going in the right direction? And observability is that thing. It's that sort of sand or air that kind of surrounds your entire cloud native system to help you answer those. And that's what we do at Lightstep, right? We build cloud native observability solutions. And it's been really exciting to kind of see that mature over the past 3 to 4 years, really, as cloud native has kind of come from being very bleeding edge, I would say, to being, at the it's not quite the most dominant thing, but you can definitely see it from here, right?
All right, Matt, same question with a little slightly different spin, but is this the end of the beginning, or is this kind of, where are we from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we are nowhere near the end. We're going to see a brand new wave of cloud computing come out here that's going to take many of the things we've got already and begin to transition us into a new and exciting phase. Many of you may know me from the Kubernetes world. I created the Helm project, and then I co-authored the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes series with Karen Chu. So if you've ever seen the big giraffe characters and the stuff like that at KubeCon, those originally started as posed photographs of my kids' stuffed animals. And I was in the Kubernetes ecosystem for a long time, but we began to see some promise in another emerging technology, WebAssembly, particularly as WebAssembly applies to serverless functions and the kind of the big promise of serverless computing. And that got us really excited. So about 10, 12 of us started a company last year called Fermyon. And Fermyon is building this kind of next wave of cloud computing with WebAssembly. That, we think, WebAssembly plus containers plus VMs is really going to start rounding out the way we think about cloud compute. And so, as both Yasmin and Austin talk about cost, observability, performance, there's definitely a need to address those problems in the existing two, virtual machines and containers. But one of the really big promises of WebAssembly is that all three of those, we see massive improvements when we transition, this kind of serverless and serverless function workloads over to WebAssembly.
All right, great. Yasmin, let's come back to you for a minute. Kubernetes itself, I think everybody agrees, it's probably one of the most powerful platforms to come down the pike in memory. It's also been perceived as one of the most scary and intimidating. So have we gotten to the point now where maybe it is becoming more accessible to a broader number of people? Do I have to be a rocket scientist and a programmer to kind of make this thing work, or can I be a mere mortal IT professional these days?
Well, I think Kubernetes is always going to be complex. It's a very flexible technology. It provides robust orchestration. It would kind of be a joke to say, oh, it's not going to be complex, because you need complex solutions for complex problems. But I do think that we've seen a shift where a lot of the users that I speak to now are new to Kubernetes. So people that have been working, let's say, decades in like C++ development, they're now starting to wrap their heads around, how do I deploy applications onto Kubernetes? How do I look at all of the new configuration settings I need to think about? How you thought about memory before is not how you think about memory now with Kubernetes. And I think that complexity is going to remain. But I think a lot of the tooling in the ecosystem has matured to help, like Austin mentioned, observability. You have to know what's going on to be able to reason about it. And if you look, for example, with Kubernetes, you've all of these configuration lines of settings that you have to manage, and they're going to be different for different services, different in different environments. You need to be able to have the tooling that helps users see the problem so that they can go fix it. And then also tooling around actually helping you fix that and then go deploy those changes. So I think I wouldn't say it's going to get necessarily easier. I think it'll get simpler because more people will be focused on how do they help onboard the new users to Kubernetes, the people who necessarily weren't at the forefront of adopting the technology.
Do
Austin,
you mind
to
if I-
that question? No, go ahead.
I think there are, when we got going at the very beginning of Kubernetes, Brendan Burns, who was the creator of Kubernetes, used to talk about Kubernetes as manifest file format and things like that as sort of the assembly that we would build, upon which we would build higher and higher layers of abstraction. And I think it's good to keep in mind that we have both cloud native platform engineers and DevOps as one sort of movement, and we have cloud native developers as another. And one thing that has been really rewarding and exciting to see in the Kubernetes ecosystem is that when it comes to the platform engineering side, a lot of tooling has emerged that has, at least as Yasmin said, right, start to open it up so that people who are new to the ecosystem don't find it quite as daunting, and particularly they can get productive in certain ways fast. I am concerned that the developer experience has not matured at the rate we were really hoping early on in Kubernetes lifecycle. And that's one of the things I think the surprise for many of us who were in Kubernetes early was that functions as a service and Lambda and things like that sort of exploded onto the scene, and developers liked that more than they liked Kubernetes. That, of course, is part of the reason why for us, WebAssembly as a next wave is one where we really try and want to tell a good developer experience. But even while that's my focal point, I still think there's a lot of room for innovation in the Kubernetes ecosystem as well. That a really great developer experience would attract a really big following of developers who, let's be honest, are they like the container part, right? But they get a little reticent to start working on the YAML and start building Helm charts, and yet they have to know a lot of those things to be productive in their work life. So there's some strain there still that I think could use a lot of innovation.
All right.
I want to pile on this train of thought because it's interesting to me. I actually see this a lot, Matt. Like, I see this a ton with OpenTelemetry, which, for people that don't know, is a CNCF project that is aiming to standardize observability data. So things like traces and metrics and logs, giving you a consistent API and data format to produce this kind of telemetry that's crucial in understanding what's going on in your application and your system. And it's extremely low level, right? Like, it's built kind of by design in the similar philosophy as Kubernetes, which is like, hey, we need to be able to give you these really low level components to let you create and manage this stuff, because that's the only way you can do it, right? If you're building a platform, if you're trying to build, one of the things that stuck in my head a while back is, I forget who I was talking to, but they described Kubernetes as like, Kubernetes is just a fancy object database, right? With a reconciliation loop. And that's true. That is what it is. And one of the things that we lose out on, I think, by the way we talk about these problems, is that we do get caught up in like Kubernetes as it exists today, as a bunch of YAML and as a bunch of, as actual binaries and code and things running on servers or on managed services or whatever. Like, we don't have that abstraction layer yet between what is the developer doing in their day-to-day life and what is the actual underlying thing that's deploying those containers, making sure they're available, restarting them, connecting, mapping ports, and doing all of the really low-level things that need to happen in order to make your service available to the world or to other services in an orchestration. So yeah, I would tend to agree that we're nowhere near the end of Kubernetes, but I think that we're going to be talking about Kubernetes, and I think our children and maybe our children's children are going to be cursing us for having invented it, because in 30 or 40 years, they're going to look at Kubernetes the way that maybe we look at like a mainframe, right? It's going to still be there, and it's going to be a crucial part of the applications you're running. But nobody understands it, and it's kind of lost it's lost to time, right? It's a bunch of people. We're all going to be sitting in Boca Raton somewhere, hopefully ignoring our virtual cell phones, with people asking what exactly is, how does this work, right? But yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Yasmin, how ubiquitous will all this get? Because going back to the title of our panel here, we are starting to see Kubernetes outside the cloud. It's going to be at the edge and maybe even beyond. And how will we think about managing this as we go forward? Because it does seem we're looking at maybe in the coming year, Kubernetes everywhere.
I think Austin brought an example of a financial company that is doing some really cool things. And that's something I run into a lot of. Companies that you wouldn't expect to be using Kubernetes are using them in the most creative ways, out at the edge or deployed almost in places to solve problems that you just wouldn't expect these types of organizations to be doing. So I do think it's something where from an infrastructure standpoint, we will see it everywhere. And I think Austin made this point, and we'll look back and wonder why. But I do see just the growth across the different industries that we work with. Everyone knows, like, recently at KubeCon, before the panel, we were talking about KubeCon in Detroit. So this last year was different, where the types of organizations that were there, the Fortune 1000s that you wouldn't expect, we're not talking about, oh, we're thinking about moving to Kubernetes. At this point, they're like, we're there. We're trying to figure out how we manage this scale that we've built for ourselves. So it's not even just will it be everywhere, but how large of a deployment will people have to start to manage?
Right. Austin, to that point, then, we hear a lot about the complexity of Kubernetes. It's going to be everywhere. And observability is one of those terms where if you mention it, everybody nods their head sagely. But I don't really understand exactly what that means, because I think it's like, in their mind, substitute word for monitoring. So maybe, explain to us, what is observability going to be as we go forward? Because it seems like it's just getting harder and harder to figure out what's going on in these IT environments.
That's a great question. To preface, I mean, one thing though I think it's interesting that we didn't talk about a lot when we started this was we really didn't define cloud native even, right? We immediately jumped into Kubernetes and all these things that are artifacts of cloud native. And I've talked to people where they're like, well, yeah, of course we're cloud native. We have a cloud native DevOps guy over here, and their job is to log into the AWS console when someone needs an EC2 instance and they push some buttons. And I think it's important that we step back and we say, well, what is actually cloud native? And I like to explain this to people by saying, 100 years ago or longer than that even, but if you wanted to build something, you had to go out and do a lot of work as, an entrepreneur, as a builder, right? You had to go find a river and build a water wheel to produce energy, to go grind things or to create power, to make widgets. And we decided as a society, as people that build things, it's like, hey, actually, it makes a lot more sense if there's just a big power grid and you plug into the power grid, right? That to me is cloud native. It's this idea of everything is a utility, and you aren't having to kind of go and build everything yourself. You're able to leverage this huge network of utilities that exist, and that's the cloud native ecosystem. Now, but that inherently breeds complexity, and that makes things harder to use, because now instead of it just being like I have this one vertically integrated thing where I kind of know every single bit, every single stick of RAM, every hard drive, kind of racked in a data center somewhere, and then beyond that I have like a highly integrated software stack, right, where maybe I'm using all one language, or all maybe I'm in the .NET ecosystem, the Microsoft ecosystem, right, and I have this highly tightly coupled set of software and services that all work in concert. But you can't do that in the utility world, right? Because that's not how it works anymore. We have multiple options. And with those options comes complexity. And with that complexity comes a challenge of how do I actually know what's happening? And that to me is observability. Observability is the thing that you need in order to understand these complex systems, to model these systems, to be able to get answers to your questions, even if you don't necessarily know what the questions are beforehand. And to get observability, it's not just a thing of like, oh, I have this particular data source, right? Or I have metrics and logs and traces. It's about being able to unify all these different types of telemetry in a system that can help you kind of both discover answers, help you understand like what changed in your system at any given moment, but also kind of prompts you and says, okay, you've got a ton of data here. You're going to need help to narrow it down. And as it does that, it's able to kind of let you answer those arbitrary questions. Things like, well, how much am I actually paying for this, right? What's the actual end user experience for people that are like adding something to their basket, or, trying to make a checkout, or anything really. It's about being able to integrate all that different stuff together and get answers versus just monitoring your system and knowing if something's up or down.
All right, Yasmin, you want to jump in on this, and I'll add this to what he just said. I tried to explain this to somebody myself one day, and they said, that all sounds great, but I have no idea what questions to ask. So will you guys provide tools and things that will make it easier for me to figure out the questions that I need to ask beforehand, so I don't have to be a genius? I can just look at something and go, aha, I should know that.
Totally. I think what Austin mentioned is critical. Observability tools, just having access to that data and knowing it will be there is great, but you need to know what you want ahead of time so that you're pulling out the right data. And it's kind of similar to some of the users that we talk to at Stormforge that are having trouble scaling their applications because it's so easy for them to scale. They're not necessarily asking those questions up front of when for example, if I set my HPA, how do I know that I'm scaling at the right moment? You need to know that you're going to collect those metrics to be able to answer the questions down the line, versus if you just turn on an autoscaler and then deploy what you need and it does what it's going to do. You don't know upfront that you're going to want to watch that and you're going to want to measure it and actually go out and tune it as you need to, then it's kind of too late. So you have to go back to kind of square one. And that's a conversation that I find myself having a lot with Kubernetes users that are scaling and they're trying to be more efficient at that. It's, are you actually looking into this data? How are you answering the question? Or the most common thing of how are you setting your requests and your limits? It's, I look at a chart and I pick something. They're not necessarily asking that question up front of what should I be setting this to based on the data that I've thought through and I've configured.
Yeah, it may come as a surprise to some of you, but vendors do talk about end users, and shockingly, end users talk about vendors. It's an amazing conversation. Matt, we do hear about Wasm. I don't think everybody knows what that is, so maybe you might want to walk folks a little bit. Is this the next thing coming over the cloud native horizon? What is it, and how is it going to fit in?
Yeah, I think there are, you can hear some sort of complex descriptions and long contorted kind of explanations of what WebAssembly is, but really at the end of the day, WebAssembly is a binary format that can run in sort of a sandboxed environment. Those of you who have worked in a Java and .NET world, this is going to sound familiar, right? The JVM and the .NET CLR are both very mature, robust examples of that kind of environment. But WebAssembly was built for a different purpose. It was built to be able to allow a binary to execute, we'll call it a guest binary, right? A guest binary to execute in a host that doesn't trust the guest. So when you think about the way virtual machines and containers work, that's the same security profile they have. And the whole notion of cloud computing is based on this idea that I, as a cloud operator, should allow you as a cloud user to be able to upload your application and run on my infrastructure. And I'm making you a promise that some other customer on the same cluster is not going to be able to gain access to your compute and your data and do dastardly things with it, right? So WebAssembly is a new kind of execution environment like those other two, virtual machines and containers. But it's different in kind in that it's really built more to compile applications directly to that format. So the virtual machine, you have a big giant virtual machine image. We can think of that as like the kind of heavyweight class of cloud computing. You have everything from kernel and drivers to the entire operating system up to the application at the top. When you think about a container, you think about it as sort of like a slice of that pie, right? The middleweight class where the kernel is shared. You don't have to worry about the drivers. You're just sharing a little bit of the file system that your application needs, and then you're dropping your application in there and you've got your containerized environment. WebAssembly, you just drop the application in with the files the application needs, and the system handles the rest. So there's no little slice of file system. The file sizes, or the binary sizes for WebAssembly then tend to be much smaller than containers, which in turn are much smaller than virtual machines. The virtues of WebAssembly when it comes to the cloud, though, is that WebAssembly starts up really fast. Like we're talking, virtual machine takes a couple minutes, container takes a dozen or so seconds. A WebAssembly module, we are in our environment, ours began execution in less than a millisecond. So they are blazingly fast and also very, very secure on the security model side. And the binaries are small, so they can be moved around a cluster very efficiently without necessarily requiring large amounts of bandwidth or long transit times. And so that's why we're excited about WebAssembly as the next wave of cloud computing, because that particular runtime profile is going to solve some very specific problems that we haven't done a great job of solving with containers and virtual machines. But it doesn't require that we, throw all the containers and virtual machines away, right? When containers came along, virtual machines still continue to grow, continue to mature as an ecosystem, still continue to gain new users and new instances. And we think the same is true with WebAssembly. It's just going to solve a different class of problems.
So if we're solving a different class of problems, and this artifact is not replacing all the other artifacts that went before, Austin, is our life going to get harder or easier as a result of all of this stuff? Because it seems like it's yet another artifact.
I mean, I think that the great thing about WASM is that ultimately, to actually take this back to Kubernetes, right? Like it's a really good object database, and it sounds like to me WASM is just an object, right? What's the difference between a WASM binary and an OCI container spec from the perspective of Kubernetes? Once Kubernetes knows about that object, it doesn't strike me that there is a huge one. I guess to that end, I would point out that Docker recently announced support for running WASM in Docker Desktop, and I would, again, not a WASM expert. I think it just adds more. It's almost like it adds more flavor, right? Like we're adding more optionality for people. I don't know much about WASM on the server. I'm a huge booster of actually WASM as for clients. I think there's a lot of things that we have forced JavaScript to do over the years that, boy howdy, it's not great at. And WASM as an execution environment on the browser will really help to revolutionize a lot of, especially productivity applications and things like that. But on the server, I mean, how does it deal with dependencies? There are things that you want VMs for, right? There are things you want containers for, and now there'll be things that you want WASM for if perhaps you have something that's small enough that can be statically linked and bundled all your dependencies together and right? Like, hey, that's a perfect use case for this. And now you can take advantage of kind of going into what Yasmin's talking about, right? With you're picking the right runtime, you're picking the right deployment strategy that helps make sense for you cost-wise. Like we're certainly entering into a phase where it doesn't seem like you're just going to be able to throw infinite money at things forever. So you'll need to make decisions about, do we have a service that maybe be better written and deployed as a set of WASM applications versus kind of this heavyweight container, and that really just adds optionality to your architecture, to your and things like that. And also, selfishly enough, this is just another argument for observability, right? Like, yeah, yes. you now you have more complexity. Guess what? You need more observability now. You need to be able to have observability platforms that can handle just this huge, overwhelming amount of data and help you make sense of it.
Matt, you agree with
that? So yes,
that?
please continue to add more complexity to Kubernetes. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, and I should have caveated and said, and we are also, I consider myself now post Kubernetes, but observability is a huge thing here, right? And one thing that's nice about starting on this WASM train after seeing the Kubernetes stuff reach a certain level of maturity has been that we already understand quite well that this whole story of metrics plus a story equals observability, and I can reason better about this complex group of things. We knew that going into WebAssembly. So we start talking right out of the gate about, okay, well, we need to make sure we can collect metrics on how fast these things are executing, where they're executing, what the fault rate is, what the memory consumption is. And observability is really, I wouldn't say it's a panacea, right? Nothing is a panacea, but it's a huge step to being able to understand things. And if you're going to introduce complexity, increasing the way you can understand the information, how information is moving around and what resources are being impacted that's what's going to make the edifice stand up, right? That's how we build the Taj Mahal instead of a bunch of small little huts, because we can understand that architecture at depth. So observability absolutely key to the success of all things cloud native, including this kind of emerging WebAssembly ecosystem.
Yasmin, coming up a few layers here. We talk about developers, and then we talk about IT operations folks, and we even went after this mythical unicorn called the full stack developer, and where it was going to magically manage everything. Do we need to rethink the way IT is organized, though, in this cloud native era? And are the ways that we have approached this in the past not going to serve us going forward? And are we moving everybody's cheese, as it were? And how should we be thinking about that?
I really like what Matt just mentioned of how kind of WebAssembly took some of the learnings and made sure that observability was in there at the start. I think that's a great learning we had from Kubernetes, and Kubernetes built a lot of things at the start that we learned from VMs and so on. And I think technology tends to learn and improve itself, and the same should be applied to humans. I think you could argue that we don't always apply it. And you can see that when you look at the different titles, or I constantly get ads about platform engineering is the new DevOps. DevOps is dead. It's just another way to wrap around the same problem. The problems that haven't changed is teams need to look at how they're scaling their delivery. They need to look at how they're empowering and growing the skills of the humans that are working on these problems, and how they're reducing their operational costs, their efficiencies. And so I think as technology changes, what IT operation teams need to make sure is they're still trying to solve those core problems, and they're organizing teams around that, versus this team is responsible for this set of technology, this team's responsible for this set of technology. What are the business goals and what are they trying to accomplish? And then going off of that is what will make them the most successful. And so I think it's very easy to get distracted by new technology that comes out, but how do I actually solve the problem I want to solve? And making sure observability is in there. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards machine learning, but I think augmenting humans' ability with machine learning, not replacing it. I don't think that machine learning will replace any sort of IT operations person ever. But if you look at Kubernetes and the thousands and thousands of configurations and all across your deployments, how do you reason about that? How do you reason about all the observability data that you have? Machine learning is a great application for that topic. You don't necessarily need to apply it to everything, but be very specific about what you're trying to get out of it, and let computers help you, not necessarily replace you, but help you.
Austin, you have any thoughts on that? Do I just take all the humans and the robots and throw them in a room and lock the door and they'll figure it out?
I think, you get, before we were on air, we had a very interesting sidebar about the effect, efficacy of machine learning and things like ChatGPT and AI, as it were. And the biggest problem is garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you have a machine learning model or an AI or whatever that only gives you the right answer 70% of the time, then people tend to distrust it. From personal experience, what I've seen in my time in the observability field is that if you're going to give a developer something that is a tool that's supposed to help them, right, that uses, even if it's using just very simple statistical analysis, it only takes one time for that machine to be wrong before they just to say they can't trust it, right? We have a pretty high threshold, with people, with human beings. Like, you can be wrong a lot and people will still trust you, right? Or at least they'll be okay with you. Your coworker makes one mistake, you don't throw them into the garbage and say, I'm never listening to you again. At least I hope you don't, because humans are fallible. But with, when we start adding in machine learning, we start adding in AI, we start adding in all these kind of advanced technologies, especially ones that are sort of a black box, then we have to be, as an industry and as technologists and as people evaluating this, we have to just be super, super precise that we understand what the limitations are, what it can actually do for us, how it's coming to these answers and conclusions, and where we're deriving the value from, right? Absolutely, machine learning is a part of your observability strategy. It's a part of the future of technology in general, right? It's going to impact all of us. I think we need to be a lot better as kind of human beings about understanding its limitations and understanding how it works, and being aware that there's a lot of people that are out there trying to sell you snake oil right now. I'm not saying anyone on this call is, certainly, but you only have to take, it only takes a short trip through Twitter to find people that are pushing, AI and ML as the solution to all of the world's ills, and that maybe we should be a little more skeptical about, right? Like, I think there's an aphorism about, proof, or needing to see the proof in the pudding. However, one thing that I think can help this, to bring it back to observability a little bit, is, like I started with, garbage in, garbage out. You need really high quality data about what's going on. And this is where I believe the open source, the cloud native community can really come together and help through projects like Open Telemetry, which provides clear and consistent telemetry data like metrics, logs, and traces from our systems. And that is better inputs to machine learning models, right? Because if you have consistent data, then it's going to, you're able to actually get something more useful out of the machine learning system at the end.
All right. I asked somebody about that once, and they said, I asked them straight out, would you rather do this job going forward with or without machine learning algorithms? And eventually they all said with, because doing it without is almost impossible.
I think Yasmin was...
Go ahead, Yasmin.
Sorry. What you mentioned is honestly my life. Like, most people don't believe machine learning. They think it's a black box, and there has been so much snake oil that why would you believe it? And I think constantly what I get stuck with, or the conversation I like to have, is we need to prove it via software. And to your point, open telemetry, making sure that we're showing people how we get to where we get to, and opening up that black box is just that. Building that trust is what computers can't do. Humans have to do that. Software can try to do it, but humans have to do it. And so building that in, I think, is critical. But like what you described is that first hurdle in users that I talk to.
Matt, you talked about...
If I can riff on...
Go ahead, sorry.
If I can riff on one thing that Yasmin said a couple minutes ago, and that kind of led us through this flow, is, we can think about system complexity, and we can think about team and human working group complexity as well. And telemetry helps a lot, and observability then in understanding the machine aspects of this. And there are these social problems that we, working together to do things, also have to solve, that assistive technologies in many ways, shapes, and forms are great, right? I remember when deploying an application as a developer meant packaging things in a tarball and then calling the ops team and emailing the bundle over, and then they would SSH into a and unpack it. It was this big, messy, ugly thing. And then Kubernetes has made many of those things much easier. I think we're still moving even farther toward developer self-service, when developer self-service is appropriate, like we saw originally with Heroku, and all PaaS platforms are sort of built on that premise. But new and better ways to help engineering teams, the developer part of an engineering team and the platform engineers, work together in order to get new applications up, manage them on day 2, continue to keep them running, and ideally not have those situations arise where at 2 a.m, somebody on the platform engineering team is trying to wake up anybody on the developer team to say something just broke. We don't know why. We don't know where. Here's a big log dump. So assistive technologies, whether it's observability tools or even some of the nascent kind of machine learning algorithms that can help with this, are going to be great, because they're going to help us as humans, do better as humans. And that's, there's plenty of dystopian approaches to machine learning, but this is one area where I think machine learning can really end up helping us live happier lives and have happier work lives.
So Matt, you brought this up earlier, and I want to get back to the developer experience. I think mathematically, maybe roughly speaking, 8 million Kubernetes developers, maybe twice as many that know what a container is, and there's a total pool of 50 million developers. So less than half of developers get Kubernetes and containers. Is that going to get better in the coming year? What do we got to do to fix that?
Yeah, I think that there is so CNCF did their, and Slashdata did their annual survey right at the end of 2022, and there were several questions in there about what's the size of each market, how many developers are familiar with this, how many developers are comfortable with cloud native development versus traditional development, and certainly every year we're seeing the numbers on developers move up and up and up. What we need to do is not so much to it's a movement from both sides, right? We can't expect developers to do all the work to get further and further into what Kubernetes is and how it works, or what cluster technologies do and why, or what pick your infrastructure tool. We shouldn't have the developer have to make this long journey by themselves all the way over to the new technology. That's unrealistic. So we need to be converging, right? We need those of us who have more of an operational mindset building tooling that's going to meet the developer and require them to learn fewer and fewer pieces of the infrastructure in order to be efficient and effective in their jobs. And again, I'm going to get back to WebAssembly because it's what I'm really passionate about at this moment, right? But when we look at the way that serverless has evolved, the developer story wasn't terribly great with early serverless platforms. And I'm thinking primarily serverless functions, right? Wasn't terribly great there either. And actually, in that case, the operations and developer team really were at odds with each other because it was hard to figure out for the ops team what was going inside of, say, a Lambda style function. And it was hard for the developers to communicate how things were strung together in a way that the operations team could understand it. And so once again, in a lot of these cloud native ways, we're starting to see what we have to see, right? Movement from both sides, tooling built from both sides, so that in the end we can converge in a space where ideally, right, the platform engineer understands how to do their operational business, right? And it's very clear. And the developer understands where their job ends when it comes to producing an artifact that's going to run somewhere in cloud native. And to me, like the golden standard, and I mentioned it already, right, is if there's an outage at 2 a.m, there should not be a reverse dependency where the platform engineers have to rely on the developers. Because when that becomes the case, then something is out of kilter, right? You're relying on your people who create something to operate something. And that's very disempowering to the platform engineer. And conversely, very disruptive to the software engineer. So I think we're on the right track, right? Don't get me wrong. And observability, definitely a huge step toward that. Focus on many of these tools to expedite debugging and things like that, definitely on the right track. I still think there's a lot of work to do. And cloud native is not going to be able to reach its potential. We started with the question, are we there yet, right? We're nowhere close to there. When we talk about clusters, we're still thinking of clusters in a particular data center. We need to get to the point where when we talk about cluster spans whatever available compute is secure for you to use, right? Whether it's your phone or edge computing, far edge, near edge, and the data center. And distributed computing, again, we're right at the cusp of being able to do real distributed computing. We've taken the first steps with technologies like microservices and Kubernetes and serverless functions. But now, like the next 5 years, this is when we're going to see that kind of thing go from its infancy into real distributed computing in real clusters that are distributed globally in a real sense of global. And observability, I think WebAssembly, serverless functions, these kind of tools to help us understand what's going on, those are all prerequisites for us to even be able to enter this 5-year period. So are we there yet? We might be getting right up to the starting line. Or I like to use, I was a middle distance runner, right? I like to use the 400-meter dash as an example, right? You spend the first 100 meters of the race just getting up to speed. And then you got 3/4 of the race to do before you cross the finish line. I think we're right at the end of that getting up to speed thing. And we're about to run 3/4 of a very, very exciting race.
All right, Austin, we got 3 minutes. You are now made Lord of all things cloud native. What's the one thing you would fix?
Oh God, pricing. I think it's a weird answer, but honestly, like I think one of the actual things that holds us back is, as an industry, is just, and this kind of goes to Matt's point about like what is a real distributed system. Like you will never get to a real distributed model of computing if there is someone that is standing at every single hop from one service to another asking for a nickel, right? Like billing, pricing, metering, all this sort of stuff. We have to get a better or a different idea about paying for what we're using, or actually billing what we're using, and figuring out how much stuff costs, what we're actually getting for that money. Because right now people are just kind of shoveling money into a furnace, and it's, and it's kind of a black hole, right? You don't really know what you're getting out of it all the time. And I think that the the economic incentives of providers and the ability for developers and innovators to actually build like interesting new models of computing, like these need to align somewhere, and we have to figure that out. Otherwise, we're gonna just like fall on our face, right? We're at the end of the beginning, and and a lot of the technology is here, right? We have the primitives, we have the underlying components we need. We need to build better abstractions, and we need to figure out better ways to kind of handle the financial and the economic and all this other like actual really human problems in order so that we can actually make the rest of that, that next 2/3 will actually be possible if we can solve that.
All right, folks,
100% agree.
You
That
heard it
was
here,
awesome.
folks. We are all guaranteed employment for life because this journey is going to go on for years to come. I want to thank our panelists for being on the show and sharing their knowledge and insights. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. This was fantastic.
Thanks.
All right,
Yeah.
and we'll hand it back to our main crew, and we're going to close out the whole event soon. Thank you all.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Dominic Lombardi, who's Vice President of Security and Trust for Kanji, and we're going to be talking about what to expect from cyber attacks in 2023. Dom, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I guess we all think that there's going to be more attacks than ever and that they're increasing in sophistication, but what's your sense? Are we going to win more than we lose in 2023, or is this year shaping up to be maybe something we don't want to remember?
Well, I think if you look at some historical data and you can make some predictive decisions based off of trends that we've seen over the past few years, I think we'll see a lot more of the same trends and attacks towards taking advantage of people. So that's where I think organizations really need to focus and empower their people, the members of their staff, to really be more security conscious and to make the right risk-based cybersecurity investments into the systems that will protect your people and your most significant data.
Do we tend to obsess about the latest and greatest vulnerability when in fact it seems like the cyber criminals might be laughing at us because they're just focused on the basics and they're like, why am I going to so much trouble to steal your stuff when you make it easy for me by leaving your credentials exposed?
Yeah, I think misconfigurations of public resources and some of the infrastructure that powers a lot of systems often is taken advantage of by going through a traditional social engineering attack on the people, right? So I think if you're focusing on some of those attack vectors and looking at your threat landscape as an organization, you can really apply the security controls to help mitigate against that initial sort of attack vector.
There's a lot of talk in the cybersecurity community these days about all things ChatGPT. Do you think the bad guys are going to leverage that to start launching more sophisticated phishing attacks that humans might not detect?
I'm sure our security practitioners are looking at ways that they can leverage it as well. I know them. I have explored different ways to do more quantitative risk analyses by using ChatGPT. I know some of my peers have been exploring what we can do with it in order to also combat what other attackers are going to use for tools, right? It's often when we talk about the cat and mouse game between hackers and threat actors and security professionals, we often look at and leverage the same tools to turn around and now attack some of the systems and resources that we're using to try and detect vulnerabilities and protect our systems. So it's really, really interesting time.
All right. When you think about the current state of cybersecurity, is there something that is kind of a pet peeve of yours that you wish more organizations would just go address, and it might make everybody's life simpler, but for some reason just doesn't get the attention it deserves?
I think the biggest thing really is making sure that you have alignment with your organization around how you want to approach your cyber risk and your organization's risk posture. I think and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, looking at the threat vectors that you have, the risk, profile that your organization wants to obtain or move towards. I think that's really what you ought to consider. Really, is making sure that you're aligned there. That way, you can prioritize from a risk-based perspective going forward.
What do you think the biggest challenge is when it comes to achieving that alignment? Because, are the cybersecurity people talking in a language the business people understand and vice versa? Or do we all need to sit down and come up with common terminology?
Common terminology is really important, right? Like if, say, using an analogy around flying, you wouldn't get on an airplane if the flight attendants, the pit crew, the air traffic controller, and the pilots didn't all speak the same language, and you need to know the same terms. And I think that's where cybersecurity professionals need to do a better job at not only educating their business partners, but around cyber terms and the language that the security practitioners speak, but really aligning to talking about cyber risk from a business perspective and from a financial perspective. I think it's really important when you can talk about risk scenarios and as loss scenarios for the business. And translate, what your potential path forward for mitigation are, and allow your business leaders to make the decisions through a more risk-conscious profile.
It seems like there's a lot of data privacy regulations coming down the pike, new stuff from the SEC. Do you think all these regulations are going to force that conversation?
I think so. I think it helps to provide additional context when you have to think about the regulatory landscape that you're working within as a company and as a business. But I think one of the biggest opportunities, with some of the advancements and some, more what we call them sovereign privacy laws, is that they're raising the general population's consciousness, and I think that really allows businesses to approach their relationships with their prospective customers and customers through that, that trust perspective where, hey, we're taking this privacy focused lens to how we're building our product because we care about privacy. We care about your privacy.
Mm-hmm. We hear about the cybersecurity skill shortage all the time. Is there really a skill shortage, or is it just not enough people that have the appropriate level of skills?
I think it's hard to define what's the appropriate level of skill. I think often cybersecurity was an area where people, have this perspective that you have to have a lot of skills in order to break in. And I really want to debunk that, because I think that there's a lot of opportunities in all different types of organizations to enter the cybersecurity world. I think security practitioners need to think about how they can mentor people who are looking to enter the community and make the pathways more accessible and equitable for people, and to give back to the community by being involved in conversations like this and other sort of community-based organizations around different cyber trends or privacy concerns.
Mm-hmm. What's your sense of, are we too dependent on internal teams to defend us and not enough on external service providers? Or is that the mix is currently correct and right? But it seems to me a lot of organizations are screaming about not having enough talent, but then they won't go hire some external help.
Yeah, I think the skill shortage is being addressed in a lot of different ways at different organizations. Some will focus on hiring personnel to address different needs within the business. Other organizations may look to partner with consultants or external parties to provide some of that sort of labor augmentation. But I think often what I'm seeing organizations start to do is to look at how they can leverage different technology that's coming out, like you mentioned earlier with ChatGPT and more AI-based technologies to help sort of take that initial action for you and then allow practitioners to sort of respond to the event that the system is tuning for you. I think that's really important and powerful. Think about how you can sort of address some of the business needs, to enhance security posture while maintaining velocity for your organization without necessarily hiring a lot of people or looking to external parties to help provide that from a workforce perspective.
All right. Speaking of augmentation, what should the good guys expect from AI in 2023? There's a lot of hype out there, but it's not clear what's working or what's kind of just a dream state.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of dream states and still a lot of hand waving around what AI is capable of right now. And a lot of the different providers that are beginning to enter the space. And I think that's really, important context to look at is that a lot of these are net new technologies that we're beginning to build right now. I do think that the tools that will differentiate themselves in 2023 are tools that are going to enable practitioners to work efficiently through different either configurations and or responses to different events, and to really take that data, make it more accessible into other systems they want to integrate with, and to sort of do larger analysis around. I mentioned and thinking about the threat vectors and attack just before, and taking a risk conscious profile to your security design. You need data in order to do that, and the data that you're getting from your different systems is really important to analyze and synthesize. I think that's really where people are going to be to make more investments in 2023, and the tools that will differentiate themselves will have that capability.
There's often a tendency to focus on the negative, but we talk a lot lately about shifting left and shifting right. And shifting left in my mind is the application development team is more involved. Shifting right is the IT operations team is more involved with security operations. So are we making progress in turning this into more of a team sport?
I really think so. I think, the teams that I've been a part of that are really successful and impactful are the ones that forge strong relationships between all different parts of the business. And just touched on some really important ones there for your platform, your product, and for your application and the life cycle by which you engage with and support your customer needs. So I think we're seeing it really at Kanji right now with the teams that I'm managing and working with there, and some of my partners organizationally. I get to work with product and engineering teams on building features within our products to help our customers achieve their goals. So, we implement Kanji products internally. We get to leverage the technologies that we have, and we get to then feed back into the product development lifecycle. So when you talk about shifting left, we're really fortunate to be able to do that in the product design phase all the way through sort of like early access and implementations that we ultimately give back to our customers. So it's been really great being there. And I think that a lot of other teams are seeing that when you work with and partner your engineering and product teams, you can start to design security from the beginning, which is often what we really want to be doing organizationally with those business units as security practitioners, is being a part of the design phase. So you can incorporate your expertise in security and privacy into the conversation, and you can help your product and engineering teams build things that will not only serve your customer needs, but will also protect their data and have their privacy in mind.
What's your best advice to helping people achieve that goal? Do I just throw them all in the same room and lock the door until reason prevails? Because, historically, there's been a lot of demonization of groups, right? The security people don't always trust the developers, and developers think of security as kind of an obstacle. So how do we kind of get past all that?
I think you just throwing people in a room and getting them together is an important first step. I think that's when you start to build trust, like you mentioned, to actually get alignment on what the teams are trying to do. I'm Never been a part of a successful security team that looks to put roadblocks in, because when you block somebody from doing something, they tend to find a way around that. And they make it a priority to say, I want to continue to do something. I'm going to look to circumvent this block. So by partnering with teams, getting alignment on your goals, and making sure you have transparency about what it is you're doing and the different organizational risks you're addressing, you get better results as an organization. So I think the security teams that I've been a part of and security teams that I'm building are thinking through how can we achieve our business goals and how can we help the organization reduce risk while we're doing that.
All right, folks, once again, we've established that Benjamin Franklin is the patron saint of cybersecurity, because if we don't all hang together, we will surely hang separately. Dom, thanks for being on the show.
Really appreciate the time. Thank you again, and hope to be back sometime soon.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Emilio Escobar, who's the CISO for Datadog, and we're talking about what 2023 will bring from a cybersecurity perspective. Emilio, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I feel like every year we start out with the same conversation. It's going to be the best and worst of times in cybersecurity. But this year, it seems like things are a little different. There's this nasty little chat GPT thing running around that everybody's freaking out about. And then it seems like the attacks themselves are increasing in volume, but maybe in not just volume, but diversity and classes, and things are a little trickier than usual, or am I just imagining things?
I think you're right. I think every year we start with the same tone. I don't think the attacks are getting higher in volume. I think maybe we're talking about them a little bit more than we used to, but the attacks have been quite the same for quite a while.
All right. We hear a lot about how stressful it is to be a CISO, and being the security industry these days, you look like you're relatively calm. So is there some secret to your approach, or are you just hiding it better than most?
Well, if I have a secret, we won't share it. But no, I sleep well at night. I think the secret, if any, is surround yourself with people that you trust, and rely on your teammates. The job can be stressful at times, but I truly believe in that saying that says not everything is as good or as bad as it seems. So there's always something better or something worse that could happen. So take it day by day, but trust the system and trust your teammates. I think to me has been pretty clear. I think one of the main stress factors for most CISOs is when they're tasked with a lot of responsibilities that they can't delegate. And I'm happy to be one of the lucky ones who can delegate quite a bit. And I have good partners on the engineering side that help us quite a bit. So I think I'm one of the luckiest ones.
One of the other things we do hear about all the time is the cybersecurity skills shortage. Is that just a question of we don't have enough people, or is it just more that we don't have enough well-trained people, and that's part of our problem?
I think it's a little bit of everything, in my opinion. I think some of those pain points we introduce in ourselves. One example, I've seen plenty of job openings for entry-level security roles that require 5 years of experience or requires a CISP certification, which by nature requires 5 years of experience. Or we ask for somebody that has 15 years of experience in Kubernetes when that technology hasn't been around even for that long to begin with. So we caught some of that. Second of it, I do believe talent is out there. I just think that most security teams aren't great at exposing opportunities where they need to be. And also, we could do a lot better about giving people chances that maybe don't come from the straight technical linear path into security, that would address some of the quote unquote gaps that we have in hiring. But I believe there's 2 jobs for every person that's out there, and we're just not hiring. So I don't truly agree with we have a skill shortage. I think we just need to change about what we think what a security person is and what they can do, and what do we require them before they come in.
On the converse of that, we also tell people they should automate more. And we've been talking about security automation forever and a day, but yet seems like it's a challenge. So from your perspective, why don't we automate more of the security functions?
I think we should definitely automate the things that we feel comfortable with. Some of the challenges when it comes to security automation is a lot of what that automation would do requires some judgment. But then second to that, where the systems that this automation will take actions on most of the times are not systems that are owned by security. So if you're going to build an automation that, for example, takes a system offline, then that's something that you might not want to do freely because you don't really understand what the impact of the business is. But I do truly believe that there's a set of low-hanging fruit items that security could automate. And some of that could be, how do you automate the enrichment of giving the context to the security person that needs to respond, say, at 4 a.m. when something happens? So you can automate the data gathering and provide the context so the person can make a decision pretty quickly about, do I wake somebody else up about this or not, or what else needs to happen? So there's some various things there. Some of the deeper automation are really difficult to do because of what I mentioned. Is it requires a lot of judgment. Sometimes there's impact that security is not fully aware of, and there's always that fear of taking that action and then causing a business outage, and then having to respond to that rather than the security issue in itself. So it's a combination of things, but we could automate some more, and I think security in general could also benefit with more software engineering resources as well, or people, so that we could actually build meaningful automation rather than just out-of-the-box automation that some of the industry products provide.
It seems as of late, you cannot walk down the street without somebody telling you how AI will change their life. We've been hearing about AI and cybersecurity for some time now, and yet the progress has been relatively uneven. What's your sense of just how applicable is AI to cybersecurity?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think I've seen much movement there or much improvement since we've been using some AI for security. I think the question is a little bit twofold, right? Of other security impacts when it comes to AI, and more of the easier access to AI products like ChatGPT, as you mentioned before. And second of it is, from a security standpoint, how come we don't use more AI? For the latter part, I am very excited about seeing some of the innovation that is happening where some founders are actually trying to apply meaningful AI to security. And I think some of the models can be easily trained. I think some of the challenges there is, how do you get the data to train the models, and where the data comes from? So for you to be able to have a good AI product, it needs to have good data. And most companies are not willing to share some of that data naturally. So this is some of the struggles that I see some of these startups having is how do you gather data? So luckily, some newer companies have adapted a better design partner program and things like that, where some companies are now opening some of the data to share. If you want to use data to detect an attack, then you need to be able to have the data that shows the baseline of the network activity and then what happens during attack, so that way you can train the model. But I think in a couple of years we should see more progress there. And I think some of the restrictions that we've seen in the past has been because of what I just mentioned above about automation is, what do you want the AI to do? And I think some of the applications initially were geared towards, let's have the AI automate telling us what's going on or doing something about it, when I think in reality what the AI should do is, hey, out of the 30,000 things that you see every day in your screens or your whatever security controls you have, these are the top 3 things that you should worry about, that we think you should pay closer attention to. So I think that application of AI will be more beneficial than what we originally, I think, intended towards AI products and security. Now, the other part of the question about security implications on AI products like ChatGPT, the way I think about it is, we're not going to 100% prevent people from playing with it. It's a new toy. People are going to use it. There's good value coming out of these products. So I think there's going to be more of an emphasis around awareness and guidance for what you should use this product, what you should feed or send to that product. I don't know if you've seen it, but I believe Amazon sent an announcement saying how, like, let's not put intellectual property in these systems and query and use that to query, because obviously that's data that they're going to use to learn. The two concerns that I have, given the type of company that we are around AI, is that notion of having AI write source code for you. And the two concerns with that are the security quality of that source code the data used to train the model, which is sample code that they've captured from multiple sources, may not be up to par with what we want internally the teams to drive. One example, I was playing with one of those products, and I asked it to build me a function that stored username and password when somebody's registered, and it was using a weak encryption method to encrypt the password rather than using one-way hashes, right? So these are some of the things that security teams need to be aware of, that if you do have engineers or employees that are grabbing source code from the internet generated by AI, which has a higher level of trust, ironically, than say, hey, I copy and paste this from Stack Overflow, to be mindful of, like, what are the requirements or what are the guidance that we need to give them around what's proper from a security standpoint or not. The second aspect to it is license infringement. That's something that maybe we don't talk a whole lot about, but again, these AI models capture source code from different samples. I don't really know what the license of the source code that trained the model is. And then if it's spitting out a module that was written with a more restrictive license, and some of our engineers are just copying and pasting it to our internal products, then we could run into a legal issue there if we do go through license infringement claims. So those two are my biggest concerns when it comes to AI, and it happens to be when it generates source code based on a prompt. Now, having AI write you an essay or a blog post or things like that, I'm not really thinking about it from a security standpoint. Right now, I'm just focusing on what do we use AI for.
How do you see the relationship between cybersecurity teams and the rest of the organization evolving? And we'll start with this whole notion of shifting left. And then, of course, there's a shift right movement where we want developers more involved. We want the IT operations team to take responsibility for more security operations. So how do cybersecurity people kind of engage and change their mindsets as that trend evolves in both directions?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer of both shift left and shift right. And I think this is going to be one of the bigger challenges that security is going to see, particularly in a year like this or a market like this, where they may not be able to hire as many people as they had planned, or if they can hire at all, right? Or get budget for buying security technology. And I think we're going to see a trend around consolidation of tools, especially for an industry that is known for just buying hundreds and hundreds of products, and a small percentage of them actually being fully operational. So shift left, I think, is great because mistakes are cheaper to solve before they say you find a vulnerability in a piece of software or a piece of code that a developer writes. It's cheaper to fix that the moment the developer tries to save that source code into the version control system than allowing the engineer to push out to production and then having to fix that later, right? Especially if you're not a company that has a good engineering practice of deploying multiple times a day to production. That means that issue is going to be left in production for however long it takes them to solve it. So shift left is great. Also, I think shift left influences shift right because, and again, I'm associating that to a business like ours, where we do write software for a business, right? That's our what Datadog does is when you have a good shift left approach, you're providing engineers all the context that they need to know around what is it that they're writing, the quality of the code they're writing. Say they're writing source code to build infrastructure, what are the guardrails that are authorized there? And you build a golden path to allow the developers to just do their day-to-day, but without the risk of the safety risk that comes with it if you allow them to freely do whatever. Why does that influence shift right? Is because then for you to be able to successfully deliver shift left, you will need to have the collaboration and the relationship with these teams to be able to get them to adopt the things that security wants them to use. That then when you go and say, hey, by the way, now we need you more involved in, say, investigating the security alarms or signals that we're getting, you already have those bridges built. So you're not approaching a team that you've never talked to before and say, oh, hi, I'm Emilio from security. I've never talked to you for the last 5 years, but I need you to do this, which is a point of contention and friction that I've seen in other places. So I think one of them benefits the other. But I actually think this is going to be more and more of the direction that security teams are going to have to go, not only because it's better for the business, but also if you look at the adoption of technology, it's always been, I want value in a more immediate fashion, right? So I want to get the value out of this product or this technology now rather than later. So we're going to apply that to security, and it's going to be seen across the board where security needs to be able to deliver value sooner rather than I did all this work, and then now that we're out there and running it live with it, now I'm hearing from security that we did everything wrong. Or I did all this work, and the day before that we're supposed to go live with it, security is telling me I have these 30 issues that I need to fix. So the value of now is going to be the team that I think security teams are going to have to adapt to solve for. And it's going to be a challenge because that's going to require hiring different type of personas. You need to have a good mix of people, non-technical people in your security team, where I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of companies to get there.
All right. Well, that sounds like a diplomatic effort. And speaking of diplomacy, how is cybersecurity getting along with the rest of the business in terms of the business leaders, the business units? Do they get it? Do you think they have a greater appreciation for it? Or is it still something that they're kind of looking at it and going, where's that lowest level checkbox and get me that and we're good to go?
Well, I think there definitely is more awareness. And I think one of the good things about, to your point earlier, that you can't really walk around the corner without hearing about AI, but the same thing applies to you can't really walk around the corner without hearing about some security thing that's in the news. So this is bringing more awareness, and I see other business leaders being more concerned about security because it's been pretty clear that if mistakes are made, from a public perception aspect, from a trust aspect, things can just get pretty hairy. So I think there's more of that. I think where the rubber meets the road is how much of that security should they care and what's actually meaningful now versus later, right? And every business has that journey. We talk about acceptable level of risk anywhere in security that you go to or talk to. You say security is all about like maintaining acceptable levels of risk. Well, that bar of accepting of acceptable risk changes with time and as the businesses grow or they transition. So I think it's also not just getting security or business leaders to understand about security, it's also the work for security to work with them to understand what is that level right now and what is healthy for it to be right now versus where it needs to be, right? And I think a lot of the challenges that I see is when either of these scenarios happen, the business leader absolutely does not care, and security is always feels like they're always the only ones fighting the fight, or where the person cares, but security comes in and says, well, you only care to this much, we care about this much more. And then there have disagreements about like how much security is appropriate at the moment. So I think there needs to be better conversation and communication there, but the getting people aware about the implications of security, I think it's the news stories are helping us there, in my opinion.
it also seems to me flat out that IT environments are getting more complex. We see containers and serverless frameworks and all these other things that are floating in, and the old stuff doesn't seem to go away. So the question then becomes, are we up to really securing all these environments? Because frankly, I've never seen so many being used at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting, right? Because technology seems to evolve quite a bit. But I think security, for whatever reason, keeps trying to solve the problems the same way. And just like we moved from having physical servers to moving to virtual machines to now moving to containers, I believe security also needs to move along that journey as well and understand, okay, when we had a server, these were the threats that apply to that server. Now there was a virtual machine, this is how it changes. And now that it's a container, this is what the ecosystem looks like and what threats apply to it. So there needs to be different threat models for each of those. So I believe the teams need to adjust. But to your point, and I believe I got if I got your question, understood your question correctly, you're asking me also about what do we do with legacy versus what do we do with new. Everyone has tech debt, and I think tech debt is a good thing in the sense of it shows that the company is growing. If you don't have no tech debt, that means that you're probably not doing much as far as like playing with new things and innovating. So I see tech debt as a result of like we're actually innovating, so we need to align with that innovation. For legacy systems, to me, it goes back to that measures that what I answered before is what is acceptable for those systems. So if I have a legacy system that is being worked on to be replaced, then how much security do we need there versus do we just focus on the new thing? If we have a legacy system that nobody knows and is not going to get touched, then maybe the how much security there will be a different bar, in my opinion, especially if it's going to continue being business critical. So again, it has to be around what are the, you threat model the systems and how much security of it is necessary. And you can do good enough security for a legacy system, just like you can do good enough security for containers and new systems. But the trajectory we see everyone going is towards, like you said, moving to the cloud, adopting containers, faster innovation. We want to deploy multiple times a day because our customers are demanding it. It goes back to the demand of now. So that's a lot of what our focus is. And a lot of my team emphasizes on that because Datadog is completely containerized.
All right. It's 2023. I'm sure you've had pet peeves for a number of years. What's that one that you would like to see resolved in this new year that basically would make your life easier?
That's a good question. I think, following the theme of what I've been talking about, we talk a lot about the plethora of security products out there. Last time I looked at a slide that had the logo of every security company out there, I believe the size of the logos were like 1 pixel because otherwise you couldn't fit it into one single slide. So imagine joining as a security professional and thinking about what is best of breed out there and what should I deploy. And again, coming from an industry that is totally acceptable to buy 30 of them because the more you buy, the more secure you are. And that's the perception that I think is incorrect. So I think my pet peeves are twofold. Is one pet peeve that applies to both angles is I think security teams should spend more time understanding what are the actual threats that impact the organization, and then what is that ecosystem of technology that you need to build so that when you then start talking about people and process, it all aligns well, rather than like all these disparate ad hoc technology products, and then you ask somebody to change from screen A to screen Z in one day to resolve one single problem. But we also need more products to take security into account and actually build products that take into consideration not just the cognitive load that you're putting into the users that use your products. So security products is a perfect example of it, where my security team brings a technology product, but we're not the ones dealing with the day-to-day of it. It's like some infrastructure team that has to pay the piper at that point. So if I'm building that product, I need to think about, okay, if security is not the user, but security is the buyer, who is the user and how to actually make a great experience for the user. So that's one pet peeve that I'd love to see solved. And second of it is, if you're building a platform that your customers rely on, then think of trust as the number one element that you want your customers to have, not just from the product will work, the product will solve our problems, but also the product is not going to cause security pains to our customers and make it extremely difficult to secure their own implementation of my product if I'm building one of them. So think about the level of responsibility that you have towards your customer, and then put a trust hat on as a key driver for business for you. So that's my pet peeve, but it applies to not just security products, but also any other commercial product as well. Think of your user and how much cognitive load you're putting on them.
All right, folks, you heard it here. If you don't know who's going to deploy it or manage it, perhaps you might not want to buy it. Hey, right. Emilio, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good question.
Right. And back to you guys in the studio.
Discover the cutting-edge insights of our new show, AI Times, a series that explores the limitless potential of artificial intelligence. Sponsored by the AI Infrastructure Alliance, the AI Times is at the forefront of the AI revolution, tackling the crucial questions of how we can leverage AI for the betterment of humanity. Stay ahead of the curve as this show delves into all things surrounding AI, including trends, pressing concerns, and the positive impact AI is making around the globe. AI Times.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside airings of Techstrong Women in conference sessions, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.